Okay, this is episode 2 of Esports Salon. I'm the host, Thorin, as usual. And to my right on this box overlay is going to be Bryce Blum, aka Esports Law. And he's a lawyer. And here's the thing, usually people make like a lame joke, like, ah ha ha, lawyers, they're all like liars and just self-interest and all that stuff. But actually, here's the thing, I've actually known Bryce a little while. He's actually not a dishonest person in any way. What he is he's, like all lawyers, he's just capable of compartmentalizing what he actually thinks in life. And so depending on who he's talking to, who he represents, and then the sum total of their interests, he can just actually specifically talk to one person, tell the actual truth to him, because he's put all of his emotion and his feelings about the other person into a different box. And so what's genius is, it's like a Skype call. As you add more people to the call, that's as like he'll change his perspective. So it's going to be interesting, Bryce. I've got 3 people in this call for you, mates. You've got a lot to juggle here, but that's basically your job. Your job is to like manage that and to know what you're doing there. So how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing well. If my fiance happens to tune in for this, she's going to be devastated to learn our entire relationship is a sham, but otherwise good.
Okay. Well, I mean, spoiler for most women. Most relationships are a sham anyway. But that actual process, everyone's doing that. It's just you're doing it with everyone. So, okay. Yeah. So we'll go round the square here. So in the bottom right-hand corner, old friend of mine for a long time ago. Sometimes not always my friend a long time ago. That's how long I've known him. It's SirScoots. And obviously, you used to be involved with a lot of different things in esports. MFA VP a long time ago, doing interviews. So in front of the camera. Then obviously there was Gotfrag TV behind the camera. More recently known in CSGO fans at least, for being on-stage host. And I think you've produced a couple of things in was there one, am I allowed to say, wasn't the one in like Heroes of the Storm or something?
Yeah, I've done a bunch of production stuff behind the scenes for a variety of companies, doing directing and producing stuff. So yeah, the first Heroes of the Dorm last year, I was director and creative director on, depending on what part of the show or what week of the show. But I've done StarCraft events for ESL. I've done a bunch of stuff for ESS, which was Craig's old company when they were doing a bunch of production stuff. Obviously Gotfrag TV, even EG, we did production stuff here at the house. We did Masters Cup every night of StarCraft for about half a year. So yeah.
And also, obviously, so that sets the stage, but Scott's also famous for, basically, he actually inadvertently invented shit posting with his Twitter, you know, about like, as soon as Twitter came out, he actually, he didn't know he was doing it, but he invented shit posting. Like,
is that what it's called?
Like, I mean, you just have a talent, you know, for whatever the way you take your opinion and mold it through Twitter. It's like, it's very unfiltered, put it that way. I'll put it that way. It's very unfiltered. Or it's got all the filters in the world applied. I can't tell which it is. It's one of the two, but it's good. That's why we've got you here, Scott. We like that raw, unfiltered product from North America this time. So, okay.
All right.
So in the last square is hastr0. Now, here's the thing. hastr0, my job is I'm the esports historian. My whole passion in life for most of my adult life has been to learn about the history of esports, to know the significant figures, to know what happened, to know why that was to be able to tell people the story. Okay, but you come from Call of Duty, so you used to play like some sort of like, I think you played on like a console with a joystick or something, and then like someone just kept like raining money. I think you had like a big bank balance or something, and then you might have been an optic or you might not. I don't really keep up with that, to be honest. But, and then now all I know is you've got all the money, and now you pay people in EnVyUs, such as KDS and I don't know, someone else. Do you have like StarCraft? I think StarCraft. Yeah, I think StarCraft 2, and maybe one day League of Legends. Who knows? So that's about right. That's pretty reasonable, right?
Well, that day in League of Legends is today, Duncan. So I'm taking the time out of my day where I'm officially recognized as a team owner in the LCS today for the first time. Officially today, so I'm taking my time out to speak with you. But yeah, but before that, just to be fair, I've played PC games my whole life. Okay. Before I realized I was just really talented on the console and I was able to make money doing that. Okay. So
yeah, as soon as you reduced the skill ceiling, Mike was right there for that.
Yeah.
No, you played PC Call of Duty, right?
But not professionally. I played console Call of Duty professionally, but sure, I played the early versions of Call of Duty on the PC. Yeah. And I was really an
you were a commentator
guy.
as well, right?
UT99 guy. That's where I was really
you
starting my shooter
commentary
career
as well, right?
What's that?
Were you a commentator as well?
I was a caster, yeah, for Call of Duty.
And then when did you actually become an owner? When did that roughly kick in?
Well, since our Call of Duty team became like a brand, you know, somebody had to manage it. I started managing EnVyUs in 2009.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So the general theme for episode 2 of Esports Salon is going to be 2 major topics. And obviously, I mean, with the group we've got here, and depending on how long it goes, there's a lot of bleed over between the topics, and there's a lot of those side topics you can go into. But the 2 major topics are going to be ownership of teams relative to the LCS, because obviously it's a very specific area that actually has a lot of ownership, let's say, technicalities and difficulties that don't exist in other games. And there also, as a second issue, we've got, similarly, the WESA association that was started by ESL, but they don't want you to think it's ESL, so it was someone who would seem like ESL, but maybe they aren't ESL in that scenario, and that's a whole thing of its own. So you can see it's 2 main ownership issues. So for context, one area I forgot to mention actually is obviously in Scott's career he was part of Evil Geniuses, running that team there and a number of things there. Obviously hastr0 owns EnVyUs now, and Bryce represents lots of teams, many of whom he doesn't mention as he makes public statements. But again, that's that whole thing. Listen. That's that whole thing I was mentioning at the beginning. I helped you out there, Bryce. I set the tone, so you don't have to do it, okay, mate? So you know, I'm the bad guy on this one.
Consider that my disclaimer for the entirety of the show.
Okay. So let's start on the first topic then, which is more specifically when a team. So let's say EnVyUs, for example. EnVyUs had CSGO team. They had a team, I assume, in Call of Duty. They had a team in a bunch of different esports. But once you get a team in League of Legends, and then that team is in LCS, it becomes something different. Because even though you're not an NHL franchise, somehow they have sort of managed to move into a world where the spot in LCS is sort of like a franchise. Like, you can sell that spot, which is kind of crazy, because in theory you can sell the spot and even put like different players into it. And so it's become an area where the big problem is your League of Legends team is then under all these rules that aren't real world rules, they're Riot rules, which is these are the rules that we have for even being an owner, for example. That's one of the things we found out during this whole Renegades Chris Badawi thing, is they can actually set, are you even allowed to be an owner of a League of Legends team? Which obviously, again, the key point to make here is to have this discussion initially, we have to go into Riot World. Now, I know this is confusing for people from League of Legends, because you think Riot World is the world, but actually Riot only are people who made a video game, and inside the video game they have jurisdiction, because, you know, inside the video game they're like God, they're like the Wizard of Oz, you know, but actually outside of the video game, that's the real world. That's where I am living right now and I'm talking to you, and Riot do not have like henchmen and police that can come and break down my door and say you broke Riot's rule. That's the real world who does that. So again, just keep that distinction clear, please, League of Legends fans, as we have this discussion. So entering Riot World for a minute, they can decide if you're an owner, and more recently there was a very high profile case where 2 LCS teams, Renegades and Team Impulse, basically the people who owned those teams were told you're not allowed to be an owner anymore. One of them, Renegades, had this scenario happen before they'd gotten into LCS, where they'd had an owner removed as well, and someone else who was an owner had to take full ownership of the team. And it also happened to a challenger team, but that's actually not really as relevant because it's sort of the same case as the other ones. So the key issue to start off with here is to ask you this. So you're a new owner in the LCS, hastr0. So my question to you goes like this. Do you, I'm legitimately asking this straight up front, do you kind of understand what I'm saying there about the distinction between like the Riot world and the real world? Because obviously in the real world, the rules governing as to whether you can own something or whether you can do something with are a bit different from like Riot's rules, right? That's like, there's a different way of thinking about whether you're even allowed to be an owner. I mean, you've obviously probably gone through this process, right? Where you get vetted, and what do they do? Do they interview you? Do they talk to you? What's the situation with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just they want to interview and make sure you're capable of running a team. And I think, if you want my personal opinion on it, I think it's amazing. I mean, if you look at any business that's privately held and operates, they have that decision-making power about their own business as well. So when you're bringing someone into this kind of situation where certainly there's a big public eye on you, but I don't even think that's really the main concern. I think it's the concern that they're bringing in partners who are capable of, you know, maintaining responsibility. And I think that that's perfectly okay to come in and expect anyone that's entering the space with them as a partner, maybe unofficially, but still certainly a partner in the process of how they're running their business, to vet it out and to make sure that partner is going to be stable and someone that they can work with and invest in.
Okay. So Scoots, once upon a time, Evil Geniuses technically did have an NALCS slot, but they didn't. Like, that was actually, they got through some loophole where they were actually sort of like the sponsor of the team or something that took over the name. But that was actually beyond your days. So
yeah,
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
In theory, a couple of years back, if you'd have still been involved in Evil Geniuses and LCS had been here, you would have been in some way managing a team that was in LCS, and you would have been almost in an ownership position. What do you think on this general topic, the notion that Riot actually even vet who gets to join, and they can actually, as a result, they can decide you no longer meet the qualifications to join, or we're going to have to shift the team? What do you think of this as a general topic?
I mean, it's in some regards, it's a hard one to answer in a back then scenario, because we've seen what the slot has become, and then what happens when you can lose one. Like, we've seen Riot's power at work, whether it's banning players or whatever over the last couple of years. So I think I have to start this conversation with, I am diametrically opposed to exclusive league type structures like we see in American sports in the world of esports. So I'm very tainted by that opinion. I don't like the LCS at its core. But doesn't mean that if you're an LCS owner, if you're an LCS player, or if you're a Riot, that's actually maybe not some of the best things for you, right? But I don't necessarily agree with it. I look at sports for a lot of things with what we do, but that doesn't necessarily like ring my golden bell. So, but I understand the business of the day, as does Mike. That's why Mike has bought into a team. That slot is worth a lot, not only in real world, but in illusionary world dollars, right? Yeah. The scary part about it, back to your point, is would I jump in? Yeah, we would jump in. Why would you not? If you had the wherewithal to buy the slot, not back then, it was even cheaper, right? If not any money to get in. I would be very, very nervous now, simply because there's, and maybe it was even you, Bryce, that said it in that tweet. Like, I'm the one that gets shit from my tweets. Judge, jury, executioner, all in one body of business with the ownership of said game. That is a thing that gets sold. Like, the NFL has an intangible, tangible product. Riot makes a game that you can buy, you can download, play, nothing to do with the sport of it, right? So that's too much power over there. But a couple years ago, we didn't all really know what that power was. But I'll tell you right now, since we're talking about WESA, that scares the fuck out of me over here. Now, whether WESA tries to wield that, become that, even though it's Riot versus not the developer, I'm not a fan of that idea of taking our sports to this super upper franchise pinnacle, where a lot of it loses its kind of open field. Again, doesn't mean that ESL or LCS or Riot or Mike or all the team owners are bad or evil. They just want to steer their business a different way. And if I'm a team owner, and again, I was one, and you do sit there and go, I want to be like the Dallas Cowboys, I want to be like the Chicago fucking Bulls, then these business models lead you to the end of your dream, right? Not having to compete with possibly 200 mediocre to really good esports teams around the planet, all flipping their burgers, right? Talking about restaurants that anyone can cook at, to high-stake leagues that no one can get into. And so a lot of what I say today will be against the idea of closing it off, right? Okay. Not that it's bad for Mike, because it might be the best money Mike can make as an owner if he owns a franchise slot in something. But I don't know if that's necessarily best for all of us, or best for.
So I've got a question for you, Scott. Let's imagine this scenario again. So obviously you're entirely free to say that right now, and that's the position you're in. If you'd been with EG back then, and you're like you have an LCS spot essentially, would you also be in line back then with some of the notions that Mike's saying? Like, for example, I think one of the reasons why to hastr0 it's good to have LCS this way, so for example, even owners are vetted, is he's thinking to himself, well, I don't want like some asshole coming into the league who's going to just try and flaunt the rules, or he's going to try and find a way around the rules. Also, I don't want people to try and poach my players. You know, we've got rules in LCS where you can't approach a player before a certain time. Like, here's the thing, I can understand some of the league stuff, but wouldn't you be in favour of some of that? Wouldn't that have sort of aligned with some of your stuff, you know, back then?
Absolutely. I'm all for some sort of and again, you get into this, like you mentioned it, like Riot land. We're in an esports land. There are no laws. There are these unwritten. Sometimes
there are a few laws.
Well, yeah, you know what I mean. Like in the general, like day-to-day stuff, like we're not regulated. The NFL has actually regulation on like legal shit, right? Because it's a U.S. entity. It's been legislated for because it is a monopoly and what it does, etc. We're not like that at all. So I think it's a tough question, Duncan, because if I put on my pure business hat and I think like a Mike or a Nip or the guys in LCS, because there's teams that are like have nothing else but an LCS slot, right? Those guys are worth more.
Sure, yeah.
Those guys, that one team and that one slot is worth more than teams that have been building the grassroots for 10 years in some of our other games, right? It's kind of a weird thing, but true.
As we learned recently.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, but I always was a fan that we were more like action sports, more open, more like anyone could be a TO, more like, in some regards, more like the fighting game community. But in desperate need of like checks and balances on all sides of businesses, on team owners, on people that are TOs, on some sort of unified rule set, on players being up to snuff to follow all their business obligations. But I don't know if it all being under one big happy umbrella is the answer. Right? They're not evil for wanting to do it. Like, you'll never hear me say that these guys are like the devil incarnate for going down this business model. They're looking at successful business models all around them that have this. I just don't know. We're already wild. I think we're too open for it as well. All those other sports did not grow out of 22 people throwing football games and football leagues and football tournaments that then went, oh shit, too many of us. Holy fuck, there's too many football games. We've got a problem here, folks.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
That didn't start all this. So, again, even if I put my big team hat on, Counter-Strike players get paid more right now than LCS players for the most part, right? Top and top, salary-wise, team salary. No,
it's pretty close.
Is it close? Okay,
I'd say it's similar, but I think there's a higher. The top end players in League of Legends are certainly making more money in salary, at least. Not prize money, though.
And then prize purse probably goes slightly the other way, but you have to win for that, right?
Yeah, and then
prize purse is a lot lower, and there's also the factor. And unfortunately, when you talk about League of Legends, like the Chinese numbers skew it in terms of salary and stuff. But I would say the big problem is if you added the total number at the end earned, because obviously the number if you're Fnatic in CS:GO is massive. Like you can earn 500,000 or more. So yeah, that's the issue. I'd say it's similar enough. But
to your point, I would love some sort of like regulation, and again, at the core of what these guys kind of want to do is organize shit around them, right? It just sounds to me like they want to organize it a lot more around themselves. And again, nothing wrong with that, but that leads you to, again, the pro leagues of the world. And I just don't know. Governing body, exclusive league, two different things to me. Governing bodies.
So, okay, Bryce, here's the question for you. I want you to specifically, as someone who actually, in theory, your job operates in the legal world, the actual world itself that is governed. Admittedly, it's also imaginary, by the way, Bryce. They're human rules that people in America, mainly white, mainly men, set up around the world, and then they decided it was sort of like the law of the land. You know, this is the way things are supposed to be. So you're also in a fictional imaginary world. Yours is just better established. Yours is like Tolkien, and this is like Harry Potter being introduced. Okay, so let's not get too crazy on it. Okay, Bryce. So in your imaginary world, we'll go into Bryce's world for a moment, but for free this time, children. We don't have to pay however many. God knows how much an hour that costs. But for the moment, he will give us his opinion on it. As someone who comes in the legal world, and you've come into this area of League of Legends, and you have represented a number of teams, presumably you still do. Is this something that was tricky to you to get your head around? The idea that you don't just have to know like the business law of this area or this state that you're operating in. You have to kind of get to know what are Riot's rules in this area and how will they operate and what is their authority. Was this a tricky area to deal with? Was it easy enough to understand when you saw it written down?
It's somewhere in between. So let me start with at the outset. I'll do my full disclaimer because I was recently criticized for not disclosing my relationships, which bothers me because I think I'm actually very open about it.
Do you know Oliver North? Do you know Oliver North?
Yeah. So I represent. So I represent 6 different LCS teams. I also represent 4 of the current top 10 on the HLTV CSGO rankings, at least as of like a week ago. I haven't looked if anyone's moved up or down. So I do extensive work in both games. I also work in like 10 different esports titles. When I started out, I did a lot of work across the industry. Eventually, for legal conflicts reasons, you kind of have to pick a side, particularly on common adversarial relationships. So while I've worked with pro players in the past, I don't do any active pro player work anymore, though I certainly think I look out for their interests in a bunch of other ways. It's neither here nor there.
They just can't pay that well. There
are a number of issues. If you're ever curious why.
Pro what? Yeah. Pro. Can I ask you, are any of those teams WESA teams?
Yeah, 2 WESA teams. I also represent, just because we're going to be talking about it, I represent Renegades. Well, still do. The fact that they're out of the LCS doesn't mean they no longer exist as an organization.
You represent their new owner?
Yet?
I'm sorry.
Do you represent their new owner?
The new owner of the Renegades slot. Yeah, no, I do.
Okay.
Although I usually, just so people know, I don't. It's considered bad form as a lawyer to go around bragging about who your clients are. Like, you shouldn't be treading on their reputations. You're their lawyer. So as a general rule, I don't disclose specific clients that I represent. I talk about in the aggregate, unless there's a conflict situation where, if I'm talking about someone's specific business or pending litigation like that, you obviously want to disclose that for full transparency. And so I try to walk that line. It's not always clear, but I do my best.
Yeah, let me chime in there too, Bryce. Just so you're aware, Bryce does work for Envy, but we have a team of lawyers. We have a gang of lawyers at this point, right? So Bryce, helps us with player contracts and just regulatory stuff within esports, kind of as an esports attorney. But we have immigration attorneys to help with visas. We have corporate tax attorneys and mergers acquisitions guys to help with our back end business. We have human resources attorney to help with player contracts. In addition. Mergers and acquisitions, I
think you said murders. I don't know. It sounds like murders. Duncan, roll that back.
I know.
Whoa.
I feel like we got him there. We caught him, guys. The whole thing was a setup. We got him on that one DL.
Yeah,
got him.
But that's the point. We have a lot of attorneys now. So it's just part of the job.
So
you need to disclose some sort of relationship with Bryce. Am I the only one that this fuck doesn't do work for? I shot him in the face a few times, which was golden. But anyway.
I shot. Yeah, let's not go there, Scott.
It was back and forth.
It was back and forth game. Anyway, so with that out of the way, and I apologize for having to do it, wrapping my head around the LCS rules, it was definitely a process. And I think that's something a lot of people miss. The LCS rules have evolved so much over the 3 years in which I've done work specifically for the LCS. It's crazy. One of the first things legal issues I remember working on related to the LCS was who actually owns the right to compete in the league. It's taken for granted that organizations do, but I actually think back in the day there was a relatively solid argument that players owned the right to compete in the league because it wasn't a franchise, so there was no tangible legal good they were getting. Team participation agreements were short term, right? So when they expire at the end of the year, who has a legal relation with Riot? Well, the answer is really no one does, because the team participation agreement has expired and the players have never signed any sort of team participation agreement. And this is an important point, it was never specifically contemplated in either the LCS rules or any of Riot's paperwork saying we recognize team owners as the owner of the LCS slot, which is kind of the weird term which has actually become a legal term which we use to refer to it. So one of the earliest memories I have of legal issues related to League of Legends was when EG bought the rights to the Velocity spot and kicked those 5 players out and used a different 5 players to compete in the relegation tournament in order to win that NA LCS spot back. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a really, that's an interesting thing to do by legal fiat without ever actually specifically writing it down in the rules or contracting for it. And some of those players got in touch with me and said, how can this happen? Like, we qualified. They used their friend Brian Cordry to sign paperwork with Riot purely. The only reason they did that is because Riot has rules that they will only work with a business entity. So you can't sign and if you have to be a Astralis. You can be Astralis, right? You can create an entity and use that entity to sign with Riot, but you can't just be 5 players who then sign a team participation with Riot. They won't do it. And so they had this friend who had an already registered LLC, and just food for thought, people, registering an LLC is like the easiest thing on the planet. Yeah. You don't need a lawyer to do it. Google it in your state. It's so easy. Yeah, and you're done. It's really they basically gave over all of these rights to this guy Brian Cordry without meaning to, and then he sold that for value, and Winter Fox was born, and the Velocity guys no longer had the chance to play in the LCS without actually having the right to compete back into it. Now over time that system has evolved, right? Riot has decided that it's value. They want teams to invest in League of Legends, right? They want to build an infrastructure that's worthy of people spending money, so that they think it has a trickle-down effect, right? They think if you incent teams to invest heavily by giving them the rights to the slot, they'll afford to, they'll provide more of a support network, they'll pay their players more, they'll get more endorsement, and around the economic wheel of esports will go. So they made that decision, but that's not a decision that was made, year one founding the LCS. It was not a contemplated problem, right? And so it has evolved over time, and there are a number of rules that have been added over time. Some that were substantively new, like region locking policies, and others that have been attempts to clarify intentions of the rules from, Riot would say the rule existed all along, and in reality it didn't. They've added a rule, right? And they're saying it's enforcing the spirit of how they always envisioned this working. But no one gets this right away. I mean, the LCS rulebook is the most comprehensive rulebook in esports right now, but it's also pales in comparison to, for example, if you look at the rulebooks vis-a-vis the collective bargaining agreements of any major sports league in the world. So, is it hard to wrap my head around the LCS rules? Not really anymore. Like I have enough experience with, I've read that rule book probably more than anyone on the planet, and outside of Riot, or probably more than the people at Riot, if I had to bet. And I've interacted with those rules on a day in and day out basis for several years now. So I have a really good understanding of how these function. I also have a good understanding of Riot as a company, which is important because the reality is they will do what they see as justice. It doesn't matter to them whether or not you're violating the letter of some law in their rule book, or even following the letter of the law. Like if they consider you a wrongful actor, they will react to that. They have a long and clear history of doing so.
Okay, so here's my question, Bryce. I'll start with you on this next topic then to go a little bit deeper. So in this world, the first case we're talking about is where Renegades and TIP and Team Impulse had their slots essentially, not that they were removed, it was that they were told you have to sell, as you can't continue being an owner. And the way this was set up was, right, it's always supposedly been some sort of rule, or they added it, that Riot essentially had to sort of, they could decide whether you were fit to be an owner. Like they could sort of declare you unfit, and they'd found some sort of reason that you were, or they'd looked and they found some evidence, and therefore they could declare you weren't allowed to be an owner anymore. Now I assume when you have your own league and your own game, etc., I can see how there could be a basis for doing that, okay, that you could do this in this particular scenario. So my question to you, very simply, would be, if there is like a basis anyway, do they actually have to have their own rule as to why you can't be the owner anymore? Can they just make up any rule? Or do they have to then put whatever the rule is on paper, and then do they have to be able to show, I don't know who they would show it to, at any point in time, would they ever have to show someone why you removed? Or can they ultimately, if they really wanted to, let's say they just were totally upfront and they were like, you know what, forget all the, it's our prerogative and we've chosen you're not going to be an owner. Could they just do that? Could they just kick anyone out tomorrow?
Yeah, so just to unpack a simple question and make it far more complicated than it has to be, I think a lot of people miss the fact that when it comes to Riot's discretion, it's a matter of contract. They've set out LCS rules, which everyone agrees to abide by, both teams and players, in the binding legal documents that they sign with Riot Games. Their authority to remove Renegades or Impulse, or to fine someone or ban a player, or one of the many things they'll do through their competitive rulings, does not stem from the legal right as an IP owner. Like, they're totally unrelated. This is a contract that participants in the LCS sign, and they agree to abide by the rules, and they agree to terms that give Riot this full discretion. Now, to kind of peel back the next layer of this, I've actually written, I sat down over the weekend because so much was going on with these two topics and more. I wrote out 5,000 words on power dynamics in esports, which will come out, I don't even know when, sometime soon. And one of the things I do in that op-ed series is I try to dispel the ownership myth. Whenever any decision, when a publisher descends from on high to issue a decision, whether it's banning Renegades and Team Impulse, or Valve stepping in and banning the XI by Power players, everyone says, well, it's their game and they can do whatever the hell they want. Yep. And as a matter of legal ownership, that can be true. In the LCS, they have contracts that give them the discretion to do this. Valve, through their end user license agreement, probably has the right to stop players from being able to play the game at all, let alone broadcast the game or compete in the events. They certainly have the economic pressure to do that. It's a little bit less black and white than Riot's contracts, but Valve probably still has the authority to do what it did. But that is, people equate the legal right with the leverage to do something. If you look at the bargaining history of the NBA, for example, in the earliest days of the NBA, the league wielded absolute power, not unlike how Riot governs the LCS. Over time, and at the time it was, well, listen, you get to play basketball for a living, so shut up and play basketball, right? Does this sound familiar? Hey, you get to play video games for a living. Sit down and shut up, please. Now, over time, the economic pie associated with the NBA grew to a point where the players realized they had leverage, right? They organized and they asserted that leverage. It didn't come, and this is another big fallacy in sports, it didn't come instantaneously with unions, right? First, they organized into a basic representative system. They demanded certain basic rights or changes to the rules, input on schedule, you name it, all the things that we think esports players should have a meaningful say in the process when it comes to structural decision making. All this happen in traditional sports. So that's the evolution that will occur over time in esports, right? As the industry grows and these superstar players, these marquee team brands, these event organizers that organize these events that, you know, become part of the fabric of esports, right? Where fans say, God, I remember going to the first North American Counter-Strike major, right? I remember being in Columbus, this amazing event hosted by MLG. All of those kind of ties from the people who really matter here, which is the fans, the economics behind why all of this works, you know, that gives these other parties leverage, and over time they will organize and assert that leverage. So yeah, you know, answer your question, as a matter of contract, does Riot have the sole discretion to ban Renegades and Team Impulse without due process, right to appeal, transparency, showing them the evidence, telling them where the evidence is coming from? Yes, they have the right to do that right now. I just don't think they'll have that right in perpetuity.
Well, wait a second. So if they have that right at the moment, you're saying that it comes from, in the contract, essentially you waive that right, or you give them the ultimate authority in that scenario. So as a result, even if, so here's a hypothetical. Let's say a team owner who they are going to ban, or that they have banned, says, well, actually, they claim they have evidence, but no evidence can exist. Essentially, that it doesn't go any further because there is nobody who he can appeal to. He's not saying that to anyone. He's saying that to me, but I'm not someone who has authority over Riot Games. So unless he goes to Riot and they themselves acknowledge, right, well, we'll look at our own decision-making process, which is very unlikely because that's what produced the result. Essentially, he's just stuck. Like, I gave away the right to have this process by someone else, probably because you have to be in the league. It's not like you have a choice. It's not you negotiate. You have to do it. So essentially, at the moment, that's the reason there's no way to process this and go and appeal it and get some like third party involved, right?
Yeah, in traditional pro sports, they all have some kind of alternative dispute resolution, some special arbitration body specific to that sport with expedited procedures, and I think that's maybe worth talking about later. But just in answer to your specific question, you could go to court, right? You could litigate over this. It's not going to be easy litigation because you've signed contracts that do give Riot broad discretion. There's a couple things you need to think about: whether or not Riot is exercising its discretion in good faith in any business relationship where there's a contract involved, or not. In most states, there's something called the covenant. It's a covenant. It's an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing.
Sure, yeah.
So you can't enter into a contract, and then even if that contract gives you certain rights, use those rights to screw the other person over intentionally or the other entity over intentionally. And then there's, you know, all sorts of other legalese in this document, which I can't get into for privilege reasons, but there are, you know, this is a document that's prepared for a $1 billion company by an AmLaw 100 firm, which is like legalese for a really big reputable firm where the lawyers charge 5 times as much as I do, right? So this is protecting the company to the fullest extent of the law. There's a legal concept called unconscionability, which basically means something is so egregious that a court's going to choose not to enforce it. Could you
as in you can't sign a deal with me that actually says in it lasts 10,000 years?
Yeah, that's a really good example. Or you know, you sign away your firstborn to me. That's always going to be declared unconscionable. And there are certain rules about specific clauses that can't be enforced, but unconscionability is the macro rule for this clause is so egregious that a judge cannot in good faith enforce it. So yeah, I mean, there are significant legal hurdles to taking Riot to court over this type of discretion. It's theoretically possible, but it's a long road, right? Litigation takes multiple years. It's an uphill battle because of the way in which the contracts are drafted, and my God, it's expensive. People never realize this. So I litigated before I started my transactional esports practice. For complex commercial litigation against $1 billion company, if you're going to even a decent law firm, they're going to quote you $300,000 to $500,000 for the litigation, and it can go over that depending on how litigation tactics go and how long the other side wants to draw it out. I mean, there are so many procedural things you can do to stretch out a case and drive up costs for a party where there's an imbalance in funding of the litigation. So all sorts of clever tricks where the only people who win are the lawyers. But at the end of the day, I think it's safe to say litigation is a really bad option for trying to see.
Okay, so as it stands right now, this is one of the points I made actually about this specific instance where Renegades essentially was not banned, but they were forced to sell. I made the point that, okay, in the past, you just had to grin and bear it when these things happened, and the best you could do is sort of say, Riot, that's really unfair and shame on you. That's about it. That's all you could hope to do is make them change their mind. I said in the future, the whole point is if this becomes where you don't own Renegades, you own the Dallas Cowboys, at that point, if the owners come along and out of the league and tell you to get the fuck out, now you're in a position where you might be like, right, well, maybe I'm losing massive amounts of money in this, my business interests. And at that point, obviously, you will go to a real court. You won't go to them and go, no, please turn your decision over. So the question would be roughly, because I want to just clarify a couple of things before I bring the other guys in, so that we're not like arguing something without knowing the legal basis of it. So the question on that is a quick one. What sort of level would we have to be at before it would actually be worth, let's say hypothetically Renegades was upset about this, how much would the slot have to be worth, like 50 million, and would they have the payroll have to be 40 million? You know, what sort of scale do you think it'd have to be at before it'd be at least like worth pushing it to court initially as leverage or whatever?
So it's a basic math problem of expected value. Let's say uphill legal battle, all the facts are in your case, but the law hurts you, the contracts hurt you. Let's say you have a 25% chance of suing them and winning. Okay, so now you're going to spend guaranteed, let's say $500,000, right? So you need at least $2 million amount in controversy. You mentioned the slot, you mentioned other things. You know, you might be waiving certain rights to certain types of damages, like future profits associated with sponsorships and things like that. So you know, your damages, if it was just related to the slot, your damages would be the delta between how much you actually sold the slot for, because the court's not going to ignore the fact that you got some money out of this, and how much you could prove you would have been able to sell the slot for a year from now or whatever. And then you have to add in the relegation system. A court, I don't even know how a court deals with that. Can you imagine the expert evidence of like this roster was amazing. There was, you know, I give them a 2% chance of being relegated in the next year, and then you bring in, you know, someone else, and you know, you guys could be the experts. So they bring in Scoots.
Yeah, they bring in me. Yeah, no, they bring in me. I get a lot of money. I come in. It was shit. That player was dog shit. And by the way, you know what? He's going to choke next year. He's a born loser. Listen, you're on. Wait a minute. I'm keeping looking over at the prosecutor the whole time. Yeah. Keep going. Pour it on. Yeah. That guy was fucking up. I always used to think he'd get carried. He was boosted. Yeah. Okay. Your Honor, they would have definitely got relegated. Okay.
Right. No, but like that would actually be an interesting question of fact for a court to decide.
See what my career's going to be in the future.
Determining the damages in a case like this. So you can. I mean, you know, honestly, I just want to see it happen because it would be so funny to watch judges try to decide like what the value of an esports franchise is and what the likelihood of relegation is, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, like in terms of what the rough number is, slots would have to be worth at least a few $1 million, probably 5 to 10, to even really think about it. And that's like when you know, if you're a litigation firm, right, and you're going to deal with something this complex, you want to see it, you know, well into the 7 or into the 8 figures before you're going to feel comfortable taking it on. Because you don't. The worst thing that happens is someone spends, you know, $500,000, $800,000, where their cap on recovery here is $1 million. Even if they win, you've still paid your lawyers $800,000.
Okay. So, okay, I'm just going to say as a heads up, hastr0, if you're ever going to get involved in one of these sorts of cases, don't ever do it if on the team you've got like Kiwi Kid or you've got Smiths or something, because you'll see me on that stand, mate, and I'll wreck you. That judge, I'll persuade him. I've got charisma, I've got chav, I sound like I know what I'm talking about, you know. I was born for this, mate. I didn't know it, but this is going to be my future career.
Yeah, and for what it's
when I sell out, I'm going to go dark, mate.
If you think lawyers bill well, experts in trials, that is the cushiest gig in the history of the world. You get paid crazy amounts of money, and you basically show up for a deposition. Lawyers ask you questions for a few days. They're billing at $600 an hour. Then you show up at court and do the same thing. You'd love it. You do it for free, probably.
So I have one last question before I put it to one of these two guys. Okay, the one last quick question is: since in that scenario, essentially, the basis that we've just set there is, first of all, Riot has a lot of rights that, let's say, aren't intuitive. Like, unless you understand that people have given up their rights, a lot of the things that would seem like they apply in the real world won't apply, because that's explicitly within the contract that you're sort of waiving some of that, or you understand the agreement you're entering in. And then the second part is, you would have to be capable of winning a lot of money right now, and as a result, your slot and your team would have to be worth a lot of money to make it even worth pursuing. So with those two things in mind, in a world where it was worth pursuing in court, the last question I have to set the groundwork to be able to have the discussion is, when Riot does a scenario like they did in this case, but earlier, where they got Chris Badawi and his team, Renegades, was about to come into LCS, had qualified, and they basically said, you can't be an owner, like we're going to remove you before you even get an LCS, for something which breaks our rules. P.S. We just invented the rule and we are retroactively applying it to you. Is that also within the... Would that also, do you think, being covered by the contract? Like, can you make a rule, apply it retroactively, and then presumably invoke what you just said here? It was always in the... Sorry, Your Honor, it was always in the spirit of the contract, even though it wasn't in the contract, and everyone sort of knew it, but I just didn't think at the time to put it down, and that would that count in somehow? Would that not be a little bit? Wouldn't that be a good area if it was worth the $50 million to start going in?
Yeah, it could be. You hit on a really interesting legal area too, because Riot doesn't sign team participation agreements with challenger teams. Their stance is that challenger series slots are owned by the players that compete on behalf of them. Now, if you're under a contract with a challenger series team that qualifies for the LCS, doesn't do you much good because you're bound to them. Riot will basically, won't let you breach your contracts to that organization, and so that organization acquires the LCS slot by fiat, essentially. But at the moment where you're a challenger team and then you've been denied access to the LCS, on the one hand, you haven't committed to this, you haven't signed a contract with Riot that gives them this massive discretion over your livelihood and your business. But on the other hand, you don't have a formal legal relationship with them. So the cause of action for removal from the LCS is pretty straightforward. It's breach of contract. The cause of action for failure to enter into a contractual relationship on some bad faith basis, that's an equitable cause of action. Probably it's interference with the business expectancy. Maybe you can say the argument would go something along the lines of, you set out rules which establish a clear path to getting into this league under which you'll sign a contract. I followed all of those rules, and so you have to let me in. That's a tough legal argument. Off the top of my head, Duncan, I honestly don't know how well that would work out. It doesn't seem like it's more likely to be successful, but I might go back and talk to some other litigators and just kick it around. Like, whenever you get a new interesting case like that, you get a bunch of litigators in the room and you brainstorm ideas. I mean, think of causes of action. What could this look like? Actions at law, actions in equity. Can we get an injunction? Right? Maybe we can't get damages because they're going to be too difficult to prove, but we can get a declaration from a court that requires Riot to follow through with the expectation and grant you ownership in the league.
Okay, Mike, if you became an LCS owner, and that means that when this sort of scenario was happening, so it was actually at the beginning, or would have been like just before the spring split of this year, so presumably the end of last year. If you were someone on the outside looking in, and you have Call of Duty teams, you have CSGO teams, you don't have to deal with these things. You don't have to go to Valve and say, "Oh, what do you mean you're going to kick me out from being an owner because you've just changed a rule or something?" From the outside, is this anything that makes you a little bit worried? Is it something? What did you think of this sort of thing as an outsider beforehand?
I guess there's a certain element of, I wouldn't say worry, but I mean, sure, a mild bit of concern. But I think that that's followed up by, just practicing business in a healthy way, in a responsible way. Whereas, certainly your case against that in that situation, let's say, in the case that you're banned or removed without just cause is much greater, in the sense that you're responsible in operating a sound business, right? Okay. So, I feel comfortable going into that kind of relationship. Anything that we're doing in esports right now is a big risk anyway. I mean, the fact that Riot has a structure in place actually makes me more comfortable than having a CSGO team without structure in place, because who's going to be there when all of a sudden players just say, "Oh, we don't want to play for you anymore," or we don't want to go to these tournaments for 6 months. We just want to take it easy. And then how do you enforce, your contracts against that, and and so on and so forth. I mean, it's very tough. So the fact that Riot does have something in place, it makes me more comfortable in one way. But sure, there's obviously an element of concern that any time they can pull the plug on you. But you have to enter it. And I'm just going to say, you have to kind of go in with balls. You have to go in and say, I'm going to go into this. I'm confident in what we're doing as a business, and the relationships that we're going to have as a partner with Riot. And I think that says a lot about the teams who are involved and who are running sound business practices within LCS and around the world and all their other regions as well.
Okay, so that's a very interesting topic there that Mike just actually touched on, which is the notion that, and this is something that will definitely be mentioned again in the WESA section, which is the good thing for teams if they partner with someone like an association or Riot, is essentially, guess what? The team's contracts aren't worth millions of dollars, so they also aren't going to be going to court and spending years trying to get some of these players to uphold their contracts. So it's a way to essentially shift the responsibility upwards, and you can get well, let's just call them like the red bands. That these armed men run in the room and they bash in the players with the truncheons and they go, "Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, yeah, I'll do what he says." Okay, you don't have to take them to court yourself. So it's a way. That's one of the things as we go into the talk about associations that will definitely be useful, because teams themselves want to know, how do we enforce things against our players when essentially the player can just go, "Fuck off, you're not going to take me to court, I'm going." So here's my question though: is essentially, Mike, it's easy for you to say, like, okay, well, listen, I'm a good guy. I don't break the rules. I know what the rules are. I have good faith. I'm not planning to break the rules. I'm going to be a good owner. But here's the problem in this specific instance, though, Mike, is that the rule didn't exist. It was created retroactively. And so the problem here is, Mike, do you remember a team called Titan? They were the second best French team. And what happened was the players in Mike's CSGO team wanted to take their best players. So they didn't say, Titan organization, we're thinking about making some players changes. You have a couple of players we're interested in. Could we talk to them? Could we have a sit-down meeting with them? This is how it would happen in LCS. You would have to do it like that. What happened instead was, in CSGO, we don't have poaching rules. So the players are sort of had a meeting themselves, like, is this even possible? Mike was involved in it, like, should we do this move? Are we going to do it? Then once essentially everything else was decided, they then put in place, you know, the official stuff. Like, right now we approach Titan, we're like, listen, we want to get these players. You know, we've got some contracts to be interesting you. At that point, it went like a normal sports thing, okay? So you see the point I'm making here, Mike. It's not that you would break the rules. It's that if you didn't know that rule existed, so let's say Valve put that rule in retroactive in CSGO, they could fuck you up in CSGO in theory. I mean, obviously, it's very unlikely they would, but what do you think of that issue, though, the notion that you can retroactively apply a rule?
Yeah, and I'm not saying, you know, going back first, you know, I'm not saying like, okay, I'm trying to just wrap my players into some contract and make sure they can never get out of it, right? That's not the case. I mean, I take, like I said, I've been very transparent recently about how well we think we take care of our players, and I think they would echo that. But yeah, so to make that point, yes, that's the scary part about this. And you know, in that situation, I'll be very honest and open with you about what happened there with Titan, right? I think it's okay to talk about this. You know, my players had discussions with Titan players. Will you come play with us, right? We have internal problems. You know, this isn't going well. You know, you two should come play for our team. I had nothing to do with that. And I had no idea about those ongoing conversations, right? Until they came to me and said, this is the change we want to make. Okay. And you know, basically, it's decided. We just met. You know, we've met about this, right? And you know, I love all of my Counter-Strike players. They're like my brothers, right? I mean, that's the way I look at them. And maybe not, you know, in that complete relationship, but at the same time, we're friends, right? And for them to come and tell me that, I said, listen, you have to like involve me in these discussions first, you know, and there's no way to regulate that in Counter-Strike. There's no way. And yeah, Damien on the other end, the owner of Titan, basically is forced into a situation where his players are going to be completely unhappy playing for his team if he denies that, right? And there's no structure in place to say you can't do it this way to the players. Sure. It just happens, and they have all that power. And where it's fine in that sense that they have some power, there still needs to be a situation where people who are cutting their paychecks, who are investing money into this, you know, have some protection, or else we can't grow, and everybody will be turned off into investing more money into it if there's no protection on your investment. And that's kind of the situation where I think structure is needed, and where I'm happy to work with Riot in what they're doing. And you know, it's not going to be perfect in the early years, right? And this is still relatively young. The LCS has been around for what, 5 years, 6 years? So you know,
2013 it started, yeah. Yeah,
so like you know, at the end of the day, yeah, three years of LCS. So, you know, you're going to have problems where you have to evolve. You're going to have situations where you're going to learn how to fix the holes that you're going to have, and you have to be able to understand that and not just slam something because one mistake happened. But you get better by making those mistakes and fixing them.
So Scott, again, we'll go back into Evil Genius's world a second, because it's good to have like the owner's perspective, and obviously you used to be in the owner's perspective, but now you're an outsider, so you're representing different things now. In a world where Evil Geniuses had been in a similar scenario, okay, so let's say, for example, I know in StarCraft 2, there was actually a famous thing behind the scenes where any time someone who was white or had a Western passport won a big tournament, he was sort of almost waiting by the phone of Skype, you know, like, oh, is it going to ring? Oh, there we go, it's ringing. Oh, hello, Alex Garfield. Yeah, are you interested in playing for my team, Evil Geniuses? Now, they were all under contract, Scott. That's poaching also, mate. Everyone in here does poaching except Bryce, and that's because no one actually knows who Bryce represents, and so maybe he does poaching. I don't know. I don't do poaching. So, in theory, Scott, that would have been a lot of what went on back then. Admittedly, it's a few years ago, but we're talking, 5 years ago. A lot of that would have been considered poaching under the LCS rules. So, if you came into this scenario, I could imagine a world where someone like Alex, who has been very successful at knowing those rules and like going up to the limit of them but never passed them, etc., he could have been someone who could have run foul of this, in a sort of LCS type scenario. So in a world where they could then retroactively be like, right, we've now applied the rule, which retroactively punishes you, and so you thought you were going to the limit of the rule, but actually, you know what, you were going past it, you just didn't know. You're going to have to sell in 10 days. So whatever the scenario would be, what would your opinion on that be?
Well, again, I think in that particular situation, it's kind of fucked up. I mean, I think enacting and punishing for a retroactive rule in any part of our world would be a weird thing, right? This one has huge legal implications financially for new investors, all sorts of things happening, right? And again, I think in this case, it comes down to one company. You're either a private business and then everyone sucks your dick and you can do whatever you want, or you're some sort of something bigger. And then there's got to be arbitration process. There has to be an outside way to, again, your example. Monty should be able to go somewhere and go, I want to arbitrate this. I need to see the proof. How do I defend myself against a brick wall? He can't. And he did sign away a certain amount of all that. So tough shit, bro. But in that sign away should be that fucking paragraph that says, like, you got to have that. There's legal terms for it, obviously, right? Whatever that body is called. But so Alex would lose his fucking mind if he got shoehorned by a rule that we didn't know about, right? I think anyone would, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you're to Mike's point, if you stay above board, all is well and good. But what Mike did this year, Riot next year could say that's fucked up. Not that they're going to, because they're growing and learning as they go. Like everyone talking about, we're growing this thing. But again, still good business practices could retroactively be bad business practices in 6 months and a year, depending on who's making those decisions. And this business has grown beyond like one company, I think, being able to hold it all. But legally, technically, they do, right? Sure, what? Yeah. Like, and obviously, all sorts of businesses have like certain laws that protect certain ways of open businesses and not open businesses, right? There are certain things that someone can't tell me I can't open a pizza joint. If I follow the proper business code and I put the pizza joint where it's supposed to be and all those things, now I might not be able to be a Domino's, I might not be able to be a Papa John's because they have rules, but I can open Scott's fucking pizza joint, right? No one can take that away from me but myself. No one can then roll in and go, nope, no pizza joint in this block anymore, bro. Now they can rezone. I guess that would be the next thing.
I guess the analogy in this scenario then, Scott, would be, so okay, I recreate the world instantly, and the only pizza that exists is Papa John's. You have to be a Papa John's franchise to sell pizza. That would be like the LCS, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, so again, I think we'd be mad about it. I think Monty and the crew are mad about it. Now, if those guys actually, and again, I didn't follow this case in the sense of all the rules they broke and all the stuff in the past that led. So I don't know if there's any shade there at all, or if they're completely innocent. But if there's not due process to prove to the world when something this big happens, our world, that kind of scares me. Because again, this isn't just, oh, you lose your slot, you're downgraded to ESCA Premier, and it's talked about online. These things are going for lots of money. And it brings up a whole other, like, what if, and again, probably not going to happen, but in your analogy of the day being recreated, what if, like, next year the board members of Tencent or whoever runs Riot's money these days go, you know what? I think we've done our part. We don't make money on this. It's a marketing multi-million-dollar loss, but our name's everywhere. We don't need it anymore because we're going to make a new game. And what if they flipped the LCS off? Literally turned it off. Then Mike's investment is also worth dick, right? Because they also are that is, again, the scary side of something exclusive. The positives are all the other things. The negative is, if that fucking tower falls, we're done, right? And that game would have to rebuild. all around, right? Because there's some tournament organizers around the LCS scrapplings, but they're LCS scrapplings, right? That is the big show. That is the show. Now, again, Riot, is that going to happen? I doubt it. But that control, nothing stops them, right? Nobody at the NFL can go, you know what? This business is closed and we're done. We're moving on. So while they can go through recessions and all sorts of peaks and valleys and scandals and all those things, the ownerships are safe because that league entity is uniquely safe, right?
So, okay, you've touched on a really interesting point there, Scott, which is a great way of showing the perception that Riot themselves want to give off. So the big problem, I kind of alluded to it at the beginning when I asked, Bryce, forgetting everything else, could they sort of capriciously remove someone? I mean, remove the term capricious. They could just decide their own reason, which is sort of what that means anyway. They could just wake up one day and go, you know what? Don't like the cut of your jib, and I'll figure out a reason. I'll tell everyone as to why I've removed you. But actually, I'm just removing you. I don't like you. So in that sort of a world, if Riot came out and they said, this is our game, these people signed the rights away to us, we decide things, now I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to tell you a reason as to why I did it, but I'm not obliged to, and ultimately, you know what? I run the game, fuck off. Like, in that sort of a world, believe it or not, I would actually sort of have a little bit more respect for them, because they'd just be telling you up front, and I'd realise that they knew themselves what the situation was. Instead, it feels like you're in a weird grey zone, where on one hand, that is certainly the case right now, but they want to present it as if they were the NFL, as if, no, we are an official league, and you know what, we've done an investigation here, and we found information here, and we're going to... we've talked to the guy himself, and we've gone back and forth with a lot of witnesses, and it's like, whoa. None of that's necessary, though. Why are you telling me all that? Because you want the perception that one day you're going to be like the NFL, and that you're going to be something that is an official thing that is governed by the real world, and it isn't just Riot world all the time. And this is what's funny, is that's exactly the same topic we're going to get into later with the WESA stuff, because if WESA statement went like this, listen, here's the press release, but here's like a gamer's version. And the gamer's version in the AMA was like, listen, guys, you know the score. We're ESL. In the future, people are going to set up associations to run broadcasting rights, have teams involved, and ensure teams play in their leagues. You know it's us running this, but we don't want it to appear like it's us because we want it to seem semi-independent. And in the future, other people will set up other things. This will be ours. And so for now, this is going to be our interest, protecting our self-interest and the partners that we're working with. If they just did that, which is basically what they've done, but without saying it publicly, again, I would be like, okay, I get it. Obviously, you want to protect your own self-interest, makes total sense. Their problem is, what did WESA did? They were like, no, we are the World Esports Association. We want to help everyone. We want to grow esport. Again, they did the Riot thing. They took like where their actual place was, and then the gulf between that and the perception they're putting out is where all these problems lie. Because then when you tell me that you're trying to be the NFL and that you're trying to be fair and all the rest of it, then if Renegades is removed, I can then go to you and go, whoa. You're like the NFL, yep. Okay, show me the evidence as to why you've removed Renegades. Well, I don't have to do that, do I? I mean, I own it, and then they signed it with the rights. Whoa, wait. I thought you were like the NFL, mate. You have to show us the evidence. Because here's the thing, okay? To bring this topic into a specific. So Renegades was just told they had to sell. Now, all the documents that were out by Riot are all just press releases. There are no actual pieces of evidence. There's no, like, here's what we found. There's no process of here's who we talked to even. They even tried to claim that, like, they couldn't tell you even who was involved in the cases. And this is the craziest part. I'll start with you again on Scott and go around, okay? So think about this. Renegades was removed, and whether or not they were guilty, remember, we can't tell because we don't have the evidence. But here's the craziest part, Scott. As far as I know, the evidence was never shown to the person who was removed. They were just told, I have evidence, and I've checked it all, believe me, bro, and I'm going to now remove you as an owner.
Yeah, and again, it's a weird land of, like, fake law we're in, and again, it's just a weird kind of... and I had a brainstorm. I think I want to talk to Bryce in a second about the basketball owner who was forced to sell because he was a racist, because that's an interesting kind of, take on a franchisee being forced out of his business, whether his actions were worthy, but obviously in their bylaws they were, or whatever, and that creates its own thing in the real world to someone losing their slot. But to your point, again, like, it's if you're going to be judge, jury, and executioner of my business, and you find I did wrong by it, prove it to me. And thereby, if I ask you for that, then prove it to the world, right? Like, and again, and we're talking about Monty, right? Like, he tweeted, I think you're talking about Monty. Like, I remember him saying, like, I found out 30 minutes ago that I was getting banned. I have not seen anything. No one's really talked to me. So again, he didn't have a trial. He didn't have a hearing. He didn't get to go to California and sit in a room full of Riot guys and go, hit me with it. Let's talk about it. What do you got? You know, now only Monty and those around him, when he goes to sleep at night and hangs out, they know whether they broke their rules or their laws or not, right? But the worst soul-crushing thing would be if in his heart of hearts he thinks he did no wrong and they won't prove that he did, because maybe he's missing something, right? And if they go, here, motherfucker, and he goes, oh, fuck, got me. Like, he sleeps at night knowing that he fucked up. But if he truly, like, that's the scary part about it. Like, again, we have all sorts of legal systems all around the world, and none of them are perfect. We have no system in place here. And again, to Mike's point, just being a team owner, to being a player, like, there's nothing in place to protect any of these people in their contracts other than who's willing to fucking try to sue some sort of independent contractor agreement in some weird gray world called esports to a judge that doesn't know either side of the equation, right? It's a fucked up thing. Again, back to being team owners. We knew we would never get sued. If we were maybe not so perfect with the player, can't pay you, sponsor didn't pay, we're going to pay you, don't worry. Always did, but everyone has delays. Even back then, we did certainly have delays. But a player would be like, fuck this, man. Well, he's not going to go sue you for $1,000 you owe him. And vice versa. Kid goes, I don't want to play for you anymore. I'm bailing. I'm talking to this team. Either I'm not, but I'm done with you. You're not going to sue him, right? Now, maybe now there's a lot more money at stake on either side of that to maybe you can prove that there is a worth there if someone bails on a contract, but, you know, way less then. So I would be scared. You know, I'd be mad. I would want LCS to sit Alex and I down and go, oh, here, fuckers, here's why you're losing your slot. And, like, prove it to me. Now, and give me a chance actually to defend, you know, binding arbitration, some sort of whatever. Bryce has better legal terms for this. But, like, third-party guy goes, nope, Monty, sorry, bro. All things point to bad news for you, right? But not the Riot guy. So
So let's talk through what this should look like, because I think it's a really good point, Scott. And you know, it's not that we have no system. There is a system, right? Like Riot has rules which they say they will enforce. They investigate and they do their own thing. But the system that Riot applies in these situations is not something that would be lauded by, well, anyone on the planet outside of, you know, dictatorial countries, right? For any decision-making process. I don't care if we're talking about court of law, administrative hearings, panel for getting, you know, caught for plagiarism in a college, or some kind of dispute resolution body in sports, right? There are some very fundamental indicia of fairness, both procedurally and substantively, that we expect in resolving disputes or in punishing someone that just aren't present right now in the LCS system. And for me, that's really the issue. I don't even want, I'd like to take it beyond just what happened in this individual case, right? What do we want to see? So like in the long op-ed I wrote over the weekend, I laid out 10 things, and I'll just run through them really quickly, like basic things, which I use traditional sports as the analogy. They all have some kind of, and the important thing is not just arbitration, because they could go arbitrate under these contracts, so they could go sue under these contracts. It's abbreviated, specialized arbitration, right? It's trying to pull from a pool of people who actually know the industry, so you're not randomly selecting someone to come and adjudicate a dispute, or at least someone who gets brought up from an education standpoint, from a training standpoint, so they know a little bit about the industry. I think it'd be tough to use, someone who's been around the industry for the last 10 years to be this neutral arbiter, because they'll have too many relationships in too many places, right? But you could educate someone so they would learn. So here are the things I would like to see. I would like to see, whenever there's a dispute, if one side wants to, it gets submitted to some kind of formal, specialized, expedited dispute resolution, okay? I would like for there to be a hearing in all cases unless both sides are waiving that. I would like for there to be a very short time frame for taking something from filed grievance to hearing. That way, if someone's punished, that punishment doesn't just linger on for an entire season without them getting to do something about it. So let's say 10 days, right? From the moment you file a grievance, your hearing is going to be 10 days or less later. There should be a full and fair opportunity for both sides to present their side of the case, right? To present evidence, to call witnesses, whatever. You should get the opportunity to say, this is what I think happened, this is how I view the facts of the situation. You should have the opportunity to be represented by counsel. You should have the opportunity to be present when the hearing is taking place, right? So it's a fundamental right in the U.S. at least to sit there and look the person who's accusing you in the eyes and say, this actually didn't happen, right? And there are problems associated with that. I get that, and I'm not saying it needs to be absolute. I'm not saying I think the concept of a whistleblower doesn't make sense in certain limited circumstances, because it does, okay? But generally speaking, without a good reason why you can't find out who is accusing you of wrongdoing, you should have the opportunity to hear from that person directly and to question that person directly. Testimony should be given under oath. Really basic way of trying to raise the bar for showing that what is being said is actually truthful. There should be a neutral decision maker involved. And you know, in some sports, that person is involved at the initial hearing stage. In some sports, they're only involved at the appeal, and the commissioner of the league or someone from the league presides over and will issue an initial ruling. I don't have a preference either way. Both are fine, but there should be a point in time where you, as a participant in this process, say, you know what, that person was neutral and decided against me or for me. Decisions should be rendered as soon as reasonably practicable. So it shouldn't be you have a hearing and then you can wait 4 months for this arbitrator to issue a decision, right? Because again, if you're suspended for the league, or if you're banned, or if there's something that's harming you in a significant way immediately, you shouldn't be sitting on that punishment indefinitely until there's a resolution. And some sports actually do a reverse or do a shorter timeline for any suspension or banning type punishment. So if it's a fine, you might find out 3 months later, but if you're getting suspended from play, you're going to find out within a month. And then there should be some form of opportunity to appeal. Those are really basic things, and there's a lot of structure that gets built around this. If you're looking at the dispute resolution process for a traditional sport, you'll find that it's extremely long. There's a lot of procedure and submitting of briefs, participation of counsel, blah, 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 right? There's a lot of structure there. But these, for me, are the basic things you would want to see in any dispute resolution process for fairness. And the last thing I'll add to this, it's not just about the situation where Riot is punishing a player or Riot is punishing a team, or where Valve is punishing a player or a team or a tournament organizer, right? It's also about making an easy way to resolve the disputes that exist between these parties, right? Scott was giving some good examples earlier, which is like, you owe a player $1,000. He's not going to sue me, right? What's he going to do? He's going to, let's say EG always paid. There are plenty of teams that haven't paid, right? There are teams that still owe players money to this day. There should be a cheap and efficient way for that player to go before this body. They don't need to hire counsel if they don't want to, right? They have the opportunity to be represented, but they don't have to. So they can go and present their case for free to a neutral decision maker who says, you know what, you do owe that person money, and here's what will happen to you if you don't comply with our judgment, right? There should be something that happens if a player wants to screw over a team because they get a better offer. The player signs a contract for a year, and all of a sudden they say, oh, well, you know, Fnatic came knocking or EnVyUs came knocking, right? And I want to go play for that team instead. So you know what, I know I signed this contract, but like, screw this contract. What are you going to do, sue me over it, right? There should be a really basic procedure in place so that the team who's about to be wronged can go and say, hey, I have a fully binding contract. I've upheld everything to this player. They should have to play for me for this year. And that should be the norm. I mean, like right now, if you try to do that to a player, they'd be like, well, screw you, I'll just sit on the bench, or screw you, I'm just going to play horribly, right? But in other sports, in other areas of the world, you honor your commitments, right? If you make a commitment and one side is upholding their end of the bargain to you and it's a fair bargain, you should do the same for them. And so, you know, when we're talking about creating dispute resolution mechanisms for esports, it really, for me, it's lifting all boats. This isn't just about checking the authority of publishers or of WESA or whatever. It's about improving the lives of everybody and eradicating some of the most common disputes in esports, because as Scott said, no one expects to be sued, so they do what they want. There's a deterrent factor in addition to and actually solving problems that arise.
Okay, so Bryce, aren't you essentially describing, not literally WESA, but something like it? Because the whole point is, in WESA, where a tournament organizer, let's imagine in the future a broadcaster, like at the moment in theory ESL's not a broadcaster, they broadcast over Twitch and Azubu and what else. Let's imagine in the future broadcaster was involved as well. So let's imagine there was a broadcaster, 1 or 2 tournament organizers, a bunch of teams, and then the players are in the teams. In this scenario, on both levels, in theory, that you could have arbitration that take place there, because then if they find that this player isn't allowed to leave, then they say, right, if you leave and you break the contract, you can't play in this league that's on this channel. You know, that would be a way to sort of enforce something without it being in the real world again. So we're talking about some sort of apparatus like this?
Yeah, I mean, look, in my long op-ed, I talk about WESA, and I'm skeptical of WESA for a number of different reasons, and I think that WESA would probably be better if it was a collaborative effort across all tournament organizers. But, you know, when you read what their stated goals are and some of the things they want, standardization of player contracts, raising the bar when it comes to safeguarding competitive integrity, and implementing real dispute resolution mechanisms in esports, I think those are good goals. I don't think you need an exclusive league to have those goals. I mean, you could have some kind of body that helps set forth these types of procedures for all of esports, or all CSGO esports, or Dota, or whatever, pick a game, right? It doesn't matter. So you could do all of that without, but if WESA wants to be a body run by ESL, and the only competitive organizer that's going to be regulated by WESA is an ESL event, and they implement some of these things, is ESL advancing their business interests? Yes. Are they advancing the interests of the industry simultaneously? Yes. Like, I think that's a net positive for the industry. So if it's going to take a WESA to implement this type of alternative dispute resolution that could solve so many of the problems in the industry, then I'm for it.
Okay, is that what we're calling it now? Because if that's actually if it's going to be called WESA, if that's the way you're supposed to say it, I'm just going to tell you right now, Bryce, I think they failed on the marketing, right? I mean, WESA's a good name, because I feel like someone was smoking on that hashtag when they came up with that name. But I didn't know if it was going to be WESA, if it was WESA. I didn't know. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Germans are going to call it Visa. That's more complicating.
I think I'm somewhere in between. I think I'm somewhere in between.
It's more complicated.
Yeah. The problem is I've talked to too many Germans about Visa, and so I'm somewhere kind of in between. I'm in between WESA and Visa. I don't know.
Okay. So to bring it back into the League of Legends example, I was still on that topic then. So this is a question for Mike, and I'll set it up like this. So in this particular case with Renegades, one of the big problems, like I've alluded to, is the fact that so in theory, Renegades haven't seen the actual evidence against them on some of these points. So I noticed, this is actually an area where I'm just going to throw a little shot out there. So I noticed when ESPN reported on this story, they actually apparently don't know the English language, because they just wrote stuff like, Riot found evidence against these people that they did this thing, and therefore since they broke this rule, and the whole thing is, if I was the team, I would literally be like, can you prove that, ESPN? Where did you see the evidence that I broke these rules? How do you know that Riot found these things? You're supposed to put Riot claim to have found these things, Riot put forward the argument that since these things had been found, therefore I'd been invited. They essentially, ESPN just swallowed hook, line, and sinker everything Riot told them, which, listen, could all be true, but they just took it all for granted, which is a problem when you have this discussion, because if people do that, then there's no point having the first hour of the discussion. We're just taking whatever Riot told us as 100% fact. So the big issue I have here, is that, I mean, it was broken down into a bunch of different issues, but the two primary issues that Riot stressed was, the first issue is the ownership issue, the notion that if they had any sort of agreement, Monte Cristo, with Chris Badawi, in the future he would be an owner, and since he's not allowed to be an owner, therefore that alone would already be reason enough to take away the ownership slot. The second issue, which is very clever to put a lot of emphasis on, because this is the one that will appeal to the public, is player safety. Because if you tell someone these players aren't safe and there's an unsafe environment, the other issues don't even matter. It doesn't even matter if you were allowed initially to remove the person. If you can get people on that issue, they will call for the person to be removed. So those are the two main issues. So my question to you is a two-part one, hastr0. First of all, based on anything you know or what you saw publicly about the case, do you think that Renegades broke these rules? And if so, do you think they should have been removed?
It's hard for me to comment on it. And I'll just be straight up. I just don't want to comment on it, because I'm not privy to that information whatsoever. I have no inclination to say, without a doubt that they broke rules. I mean, I'm removed from that, And I will say this, though, that if the players were in any way, that had some safety issues, I mean, that could be it could be tons of things. It could be, it could be one of the management smoking a joint when he doesn't have his medical marijuana card at the team house, and therefore they could be, arrested for possession of marijuana because they're associated in the same location. I don't know, anything like that. That's just an example. So it could be something so small as that, but sure, that's, if you really want to get down and dirty in it, you need to take care of your players and make sure that they have a safe place to train and play. And, I don't know what other reasons that could have been. But in addition, they clearly set out a ruling on Chris Badawi that he could not have any ownership or kickback or anything like that, and I'm assuming that's what it says, allegedly. So he, if he was involved in the team and they felt like he was still very involved, which Maybe he was, I don't know, but they would have grounds, and that's just the reality of the situation, and it's tough. It's a tough spot, but you know, just to kind of answer your question, I think that whatever Riot decided on, they may have had their reasons. Were they as severe as maybe we think that they could have to provide a basis for this? I don't know. And I just can't answer it. And I think that's just between Riot and the Renegades organization, and I can't really say much about it.
Okay. Scott, what do you think? I mean, obviously, again, you're just going off public information, or to a degree, I mean, you're in a position where you can obviously comment more than Mike. You can just do the classic thing that I do in a lot of my videos, which I openly say. I just speculate based on years in the industry, you know, the tip of the iceberg I might know about a topic. I try and fill the gap myself. And I always say I'm speculating, but I'm asking you to speculate, essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think on this particular case?
I mean, unlike Mike, he's probably declining for valid business reasons and political reasons, etc., being a new owner. But also, like him, probably not up to speed with all the details, especially the stuff that happened before. I mean,
nobody can be on some of these things,
but I don't follow the scene really, Duncan. Okay. So I can't even talk about like the drama before with Chris and really the detail of it. I know the name. I know he got in some trouble.
Okay, I'll give you the quick version then. Okay, the very quick version is that a bunch of the team owners went to Riot and said this Chris Badawi character is trying to poach our players. And remember, like I said, in the LCS rules, you have to literally talk to the org before you talk to the player. You can't ever even say to him, oh, what are you doing next summer? That could even be taken as like potential poaching. So anyway, they went and they said this person's done multiple of us. It's not just like one of us, you know, there's 3, 4, and a bunch of people came forward. So Riot said, essentially, we're going to make a rule now for poaching that says you can't do these things, and then we're going to retroactively apply it, and so we found you guilty of it. You can't be an owner for this team when it comes into LCS. At the time, Monte Cristo was like a minority owner, so essentially they implied like someone else has to own this team. So then officially, Monte Cristo became sole owner. And in theory, Chris Badawi had no ownership stake, although I will say he like lived in a house with the players there. He clearly did pay some things for them, but in theory, I mean, use whatever American terminology you want. He was the best booster in the world. Whatever you want to use that terminology you all use in NA is.
Booster, alumni booster?
Yeah, but in theory, no one had any evidence to this point in time that he was an owner or going to be an owner. And then Riot's now claimed they've got the evidence of that, so he's going to be removed for that. And then on top of that, it was an unsafe environment, therefore, you know, appeal to the public, like you shouldn't be allowed to do this with your players. They've overstretched the line. And then since this isn't a first incident, because it's Badawi and now it's Monty and now it's the unsafe environment, add it all together. You know, this essentially we can't let this happen again. There can't be a third strike here. The org's fucked up too many times, and we're going to have to make them. So, what do you think of just hearing that information? Like I haven't said whether it's true or not, but that's the basis of it.
Again, it sounds like this Chris guy might be like not following their rule set. But again, I would still go back to you can't make a rule and then retroactively nail me for speeding last week. When last week I could go 75 and now I can only go 55. So, but But regardless, they did kick him out. They said he was done. They set a rule. They set some regulations around him. If those were broken by Monty or others, but this is where it gets like I can't even look at anyone's evidence and then decide my opinion based on what I can read about because there is nothing, right? So I don't even know Riot in the sense that I would trust them with anything. So I certainly would not give them the benefit of the doubt on a very private investigation that they've not leaked any information about or said here is the evidence. So but I know that's their nature, right? They just make rulings. They don't make rulings and then prove why they made them. I know Monty, I don't know Chris. And what I know of Monty, it seems like he would not be the kind of guy that would be a shady team owner or be breaking any sort of laws or rules or regulations around his ownership. But again, I don't know him that well either. But I would probably err on the side of Monty, especially because he wasn't involved in like pleading his case. But again, that sounds core not to the Monty decision, but to the Riot way of doing business when it comes to investigating, which is a fatal flaw, I think, in their whole process of finding issues and solving them, finding them, whatever. So I think at the core, now again, what I do know from drama is Monty is outspoken. There's always drama around the game and Monty outside of his ownership, and he's outspoken against Riot and all those kind of things. You know, he's not a Riot broadcaster. He doesn't toe that line. He doesn't play that game, I think, as much as everybody else. I don't think. Again, I'm an outsider when it even comes to this stuff, but it seems like he's a little edgier, maybe more like you And that's like, so has he poked the bear too much? And this is another way of Riot to go, enough, Monty, like putting you back in your little box. I don't know. Again, no matter who it was, even if it was even someone I knew even better, it would definitely be a, come on, you've got to prove this shit. There's too much money on the line for you as a business not to prove to another business that they did in fact break your rules. And if you can do it, then you shut everybody up, right? Then who bitches, right? And if you can't prove it, then you shouldn't have busted them, right? Like, and again, Bryce's point about, I can't wait to read this article, because like, regardless of who does that stuff, it needs to be everywhere. Those tenets need to go all over esports, man, in a lot of ways. So I know it's a long answer, Duncan, but I would think, again, I know Monty more than I know Riot, and that is weird, as limited as that is. I would go with Monty maybe being railroaded a little bit, but I could be totally wrong. Like, Monty could be a piece of shit, and like could be scared. I don't know. Like, Monty, I don't know. I don't know.
You know what, Scott? We could all be pieces of shit. In 10 years, people could look back on this. They could find out that like Bryce was just like that guy out of. He was like the Carlito's Way attorney guy who's just a piece of shit, run all shit. Mike could turn out to be totally corrupt, and he's just doing God knows what to his players. Can't imagine that. Scott, I mean, you can decide his crimes for yourselves. Not a new guy and in the end, I was the only good guy after all. Right? I was the one good guy. So okay, Rice. Here's to preface asking you a similar question. Even though you said you represented Renegades, okay, be aware, Bryce, that the case is done. You are not appealing to anyone right now to have Renegades freed. You're not talking to Riot Games right now. They are watching, but you're not appealing to them. You're just talking to us, okay, Bryce? So pretend you're a human being called Bryce who happened to have been associated with Renegades. You're not representing Renegades right now, okay? So the question is, what do you think on this? Like, if these things were true, should they be removed? Is that a reasonable course? And what is your thought on the general topic of this? Because obviously, again, we can't actually know. We can't pick over the details of the evidence. We don't know what it is.
Yeah, so I can't directly comment on the Renegades, on whether or not the punishment was just, because it might result in litigation down the road. We just don't know, and so them being a client, I'm just going to err on the side of caution and not comment on it specifically for conflicts reasons. I mean, worst thing that could possibly happen, right, is they do decide, because statute of limitation for breach of contract in Washington, there's 6 years. I think there's 7 in California, although I'm sure some California attorneys watching this and like, oh God, it's 5 or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is there are number of years, not days. They could wake up 2 years down the road and say, we got totally screwed. We've got Monty wins the lottery and says, hey, remember that time that we felt like you stuck it to us. We're going to come back and sue you over it. So and I don't, as their lawyer, I can't be commenting on it publicly. What I will say is, as to kind of tie up the situation, the important fact isn't whether or not it was substantively correct or not from my perspective. The important fact is there's a complete lack of procedural fairness and transparency that would allow people within the industry, including the team themselves, including the other teams in the LCS, the fans, right, from knowing one way or the other. Like one of the favorite debates in CSGO is whether or not the iBuyPower players should have been banned for life, right? And I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides associated with, how you view deterrent theories of punishment versus retributive versus rehabilitative, right? There's all sorts of very interesting questions about how important is match fixing. Should we factor in their age? Should we factor in the amount of money it's taking time? All that stuff. I think there's all good arguments. But the substance of it is pretty much agreed on, right? They've admitted it. No one denies that they fixed matches. So we know what happened, and so we're able to discuss and debate the punishment. That same thing is true by and large for dispute resolution processes in traditional sports. The evidence that is being considered in these special arbitration cases is generally speaking made public. There are limited exceptions where it's not, but for the most part, we can have a discussion about whether or not Tom Brady got railroaded because we know, where the evidence is coming from, what they're saying, right? And we can say, okay, so that, the PSI on the balls was this number, but did he know or did he not know? And we can find, here's how much he participated in the investigation. He deleted, he threw away his phone or whatever, so we don't have access to that evidence. Well, we can factor that against him, right? Because why would he throw away his phone or delete all of his messages or whatever, right? So we can have the substantive discussion about whether or not the punishment was right or wrong. When it comes to the Riot process, anyone who goes on Reddit and says, you know, they shouldn't have gotten banned or they should have gotten banned without saying, I am speculating based on whatever, is just, it's totally disingenuous, right? Because I'm their lawyer, and I don't even, if I wanted to comment, I could not comment with 100% certainty because I don't feel like I have all the information. So the notion that someone external could possibly, or even that, you know, Monty or Chris could, right? It's just, it is a weird system that we live in, that there is so little transparency that we're completely unequipped to have a substantive conversation about whether or not Riot did the right thing, abused its powers in some way, etc.
Well, and Duncan, there's one note just on this idea of poaching, right? Because it needs to be discussed, I think. The rule, like, I know this is one of many rules, right? But like you talked about in the years past, like everyone's guilty of it, right? And I think everyone tends to be guilty of it for the right reason, or I want to think that one of the main issues with why you don't want to go straight to the team first is they will cock block you. 9 times out of 10, and again, we happen to be sitting with a fair, player-centric owner in Mike, I think, for the most part. At least the Mike that I've always talked to, ex-player, very player-centric organization. Whether he wants exclusive leagues or not down the line, if he still thinks that's right for esports, doesn't mean he's a good owner, right? But the reason why we would go talk to a player first, or anybody else would, because if I go to that guy's boss who holds the paper on him, unfortunately, he holds too much paper on him, for one, is also the problem. He owns too many rights to that kid. He is not going to want to lose that kid no matter what. So he immediately go, he's not available till his contract's up.
Yep. And that's something, by the way, you can contract out of really fast, Scott. Like I've started putting a standard in my contract templates, a clause that I call other opportunities. It's in the Renegades contracts. I can say that because Monty has a public blog post talking about it. And basically what it says is, if I, the owner, am approached by another organization that is interested in talking to you and signing you when your contract is up, or even right now, I will inform you of that within 3 days. And it goes both ways. So if a player gets approached, right, if someone's trying to poach you, you have a duty to tell the organization so they can be kept in the loop and they can make a counter.
Yeah, and that works because there's both sides of that coin, right? Kid doesn't want to play for the team anymore, and he's a bad fit. So everyone wants him gone. But he's still got contract time, and he maybe is worth some money to that org, right? Or to the kid even. So, but I think we always then did right. If we went to Huck as a prime example, we paid a shitload of fucking money for that kid to do it right. But you know damn well we went to Chris first and went, hey, dude, are you even interested in joining Evil Geniuses? Before, why would I ask Nazgul first, my arch rival in the space, to poach his main player, who will then spin his machine as quick as ever to make sure it never happens? Find out we didn't negotiate with him. Are you interested? Yeah, kind of interested. What kind of money? Well, I don't know. Yeah, okay, well, we're close. Now let's talk about your contract. Are you still on it? Still on it. Okay, now we have to talk to your boss, right? That's, I think, absolutely okay in this world to gauge interest, whether it's players doing it, especially team games. Like, they have to want to play with each other. This is not the matter of sports in some regards where you're going to play with that quarterback even though you might not want to, right?
Sure, yeah.
So, like, I'm okay with that level of investigative interest. And then, you know, but obviously a player, like, when it gets to the point where, okay, we want him now, he's got 5 months, the owners need to start talking about how to make that happen, or it doesn't happen.
Sure, so that's why it's funny you bring that up.
The conversations, like, just having the conversation or having beers in the bar, hey, dude, you happy? No, I fucking hate my team, man. No one can fucking control bottom. I'm fucking out of here, right? Yeah. Let that lead to a better place for that player. And again, a little bit of rules in place. And again, if there's something more official in place eventually, but it sounds like the LCS, you have to start with, like, calling his boss.
Yes,
and that's
100%.
just fucked up. Like, that's fucked up. You know, not even agent to agent, not player agent to player agent, or player agent to team. Right? It's just weird.
There's also no grace period, which exists in a lot of traditional sports, where so Riot publishes the end dates of contracts, but the poaching rules run up until the end of that contract. There's no, hey, when a player's 3 months from being done, you can reach out to them and say, hey, I'm not trying to poach you, right? I don't want you to take you now. You're under contract with that team. I want you to fill out that contract, or, you know, fill out the terms of that contract, but when you're done, when that contract expires, I want you to know I'm interested. I want you to know that there could be a home for you here. We're huge fans of you and your talent. We think you're a great fit for our organization and the rest of the roster. That conversation is also poaching under the LCS rules, which, by the way, you know, in the real world, we also have poaching rules. It's called tortious interference. You can't knowingly interfere with someone else's business relationship. You can't knowingly cause someone else to breach a contract. But it's not that doesn't mean that you can't. So if I hire Duncan to, I'm going to found a new website and I'm saying, I want Thorin's content exclusive for the next year. I'm gamers, whatever, right? Like I want your content for the next 3 years. Okay, fine. If someone else wants to talk to, and we sign that contract, we've got a binding contract for 3 years. If someone comes and says, hey, when that contract's up, I would love for you to come do the exact same thing for my website, or I want you to do video content or whatever, right? Like that's a conversation you can have, and I can't do anything about it because they're not torsously interfering with my contract. I still get the benefit of my bargain. Exactly. Duncan is economically and legally entitled to go and figure out what his next thing is. You shouldn't have to wait. In the LCS rules, you have this very real tension between, so 2 months before your contract is up, organization comes to you and says, I want to re-sign you, right? The player doesn't know their fair market value at that point. They haven't had the opportunity to talk to anyone. They don't know how many teams have approached their organization. The organization has refused to talk to, relay that information. And so they have a choice. Do I say no, I want to test my value in the open market, and then maybe they've risked the spot, they've, sour relations with that owner, and that team doesn't want them anymore, and they go out in the open market and they're screwed, right? No one wants them. Or are they going to re-sign and get locked in, and then they never get the opportunity to test their value on the open market, right? So it is a very real problem. And Riot's poaching rules in this area, well, I think having poaching rules is really good, and I think having poaching rules enforced is really good. I mean, I've been public about this multiple times. I think that the way in which the Riot poaching system is set up is problematic.
Sure.
Okay, I could give you some perspective on that too, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm in the middle. I'm barely sleeping for the past week because, I'm putting together an LCS roster 2 weeks before the LCS. And so I'm having to go and negotiate with owners in China and Korean players and, deal with the teams that I have to go and try and sign players from and pay buyouts with. And a lot of the LCS teams, the NA teams, are in Korea boot camping and so on. So I'm staying awake late hours of the night trying to make this happen. But I'll tell you that I still prefer this kind of structure, no matter how hard and how expensive it is for me. It's much more difficult for me in this situation where players aren't allowed to talk to each other and try to, coax them into joining your team and putting pressure on the other team owner. It's much harder and much more difficult in this situation. It was much easier when my players just came to me and said, hey, we've already talked to Kenny S and Apex, and we want you to go to Titan and just make it happen. And so Damien, Titan's basically forced to sell them to me, and I have to give him some kind of fair deal and work it out. It's much easier that way because the players already set it up. And now it's much more difficult for me, but I prefer it because it's much less dirty, and team owners and who are out there who are working hard to invest into a team, to pay that paycheck to their players, to give them support and infrastructure so they can just focus on playing in their career. You need to give those guys some protection too. We get a bad rap as team owners, and everybody says, oh, you're greedy and you just want to make a bunch of money. No, I want to make money so I can continue to pay my players. I want to make money so I can continue to run my organization and support our fan base and give them something to cheer for. It's difficult to run our business. So with that said, I still prefer the Riot model, even as difficult as it may seem, and as kind of dictatorial as you might think it might be. It's just, maybe there are some things that could help it and make it a little better, but at the same time, I think it's very structured in a way that it protects teams and players.
Yeah, I think just so we're clear on this, I mean, we've done the first, however long of this just on the Riot issue, and we'll talk. I think CS:GO has its own problems. Like, I don't think either of these systems are perfect. I think there are certain huge advantages to the Riot system. I think having poaching rules is a good thing. I would like to see there be a little grace period at the end, right? So 2 months. A 2-month window of time at the end where you can openly approach a player. I would like to see some kind of affirmative obligation on the part of all teams that you don't have to connect them to negotiate, right? You don't have to foment turmoil, but you have to say, hey, this team has contacted me and said when your contract's up, they would be interested in talking to you, right? Like there is a middle ground here between having enough structure to create protection for the investment of teams and to protect players, right? And to get a system that works well and does business in the right way. There's a middle ground between that and having some structure and having too much structure and it being kind of overbearing. And so, whereas Riot's really on one end of the coin, control, there are some great things that come from that, but there's also some weaknesses. CSGO's on the opposite end of that, and I think we could use some more regulation in CSGO. I think it would be good to have some kind of overarching rules about competitive integrity and player contracts and poaching and you name it, right? I think there's value in creating that structure, and we just have to figure out a way to get esports somewhere in the middle.
Okay. To give a counterbalance to what Mike said there about how it's a good thing and how it protects the teams and the players, etc. I mean, I could do a whole video on this topic of poaching itself, which I probably will at some point in time. So I won't waste all the Thorin's thoughts on this one, but I'll give you a little taste of it, okay? Which is basically, oh wait a second, it's died. I assume that's my internet lagging, so we'll just wait there a second for them to come back. Let's just wait there a second. Oh, is everyone back?
Yep.
Yeah, I lagged for a second. I didn't say anything important. Is Bryce there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, right.
No,
Everyone's here.
We can hear you the whole time.
Oh,
yep.
Right, fair enough then, right? So basically, my basic thought on it is, I agree there's some benefits to it, but I think a lot of them lie on the side of the team. Like, for example, one of the biggest issues I have, like I'll put them up very simply, is that first of all, if you're a player, what Bryce said is very important. It's not like you're a player with a 5-year contract and you're coming to try and sign me while I'm on year 2 and you're going to get me to come and leave. You're basically getting to make it so that when I am finished with my contract with you, with no promise to re-sign, you can then tell me you're not allowed to know if anyone wants you until the second we no longer have a contract. Now, the problem with that is, what would you gain from that if you weren't going to sign the player again anyway? Well, what you gain is information advantage over the player. And therefore, the player, when he leaves his contract, has to then, from that second onwards, scramble and find where his next team is. Now, that might be re-signing with you, that might be going elsewhere, but to re-sign with you, he needs market value, he needs to know what he's worth. And the biggest problem here is there's two simple ways to show that this system doesn't quite work as well as it could right now, which goes like this. One, in theory, players have the whole off-season. It shouldn't be an issue. So why is it an issue? Because everyone scrambles at the same time to get all the players. Therefore, I can't wait until 3 days after my contract ends because the team I now want to join that I couldn't talk to just got their player. You know what? I was available, but they didn't know that, and then they signed this other player. And lastly, the other issue that shows me that this poaching system doesn't work is, how come so many players sign the day after their contract ends? How is that possible? What, so within an hour after their contract ended, they got a whole legal thing together, they signed it all, they knew it was all... No, what happened is, everyone poaches to some degree. We've just changed the definition of what poaching is and found a level of abstraction to not get caught. So poaching is where Bryce is the owner of a team, and he says, I really need a top laner. And he says that to me, someone who has nothing to do with any team. And I'm friends with a guy who's a top laner. And then I'm talking to that guy separately, and he goes, you know what, I really need a team. And I go, you know what, I think just personally, as an independent body, you'd probably be great on Bryce's team. I think he might need someone in the future. Now, Riot's going to have a very hard time nailing me for that or getting any information. So as a result, the same poaching that would have taken place with Bryce going straight to the player just took place, but there was one level of abstraction to make it more difficult. So to me, I agree, there's definitely some benefits to it. In the future, there should be more structure. But in all these scenarios, you can get around it, which leads neatly into me giving my thoughts on the Renegades issue, so we can close the door on that, we can go into CSGO. So here's my thoughts on the Renegades issue. It's exactly what I just described there. What is the point in a rule which you can't enforce, but you then enforce anyway as though you caught me and you didn't because I used abstraction? So here's the question to ask, okay? Think about it logically. Let's imagine that they say, on the first key topic, ownership of Renegades, that Chris Badawi had an agreement with Monte Cristo to one day own some percentage, and remember, he's not allowed to own any percentage until his ban ends and it's reviewed, some percentage of Renegades again. My big problem there is, we have no evidence. As far as I know, Renegades was shown no evidence, and my question would be, what evidence could exist? Now, are you telling me that Riot has a contract between Monty and Chris Badawi? Because if so, both of those people, Monty and Chris Badawi, are morons. Why would you ever sign a contract which could then fuck your whole team? So let's imagine that that's the case, right? How did Riot get this contract? Which one of Chris Badawi and Monty, in theory the only ones who need to have the contract, and have it in their safe, which one of those told Riot? So in that scenario, I actually think, speculating, you can discount that. Very unlikely. Now here's what's funny. I hope I'm never called for a trial of this case, because I won't come. Because I'm going to tell you right now, Bryce, I think that they did have a contract, but it was a verbal one, probably only said between the two of them in a private locked room, hermetically sealed, where they were making sure there's no cameras that were lip reading them, and they said, listen, it's pretty obvious it was your team and I was a minority owner, and obviously I don't want to fucking pay for all this stuff right now, and you have money, so you stick around, you pay for it for a while, and one day we'll find a way, I don't know how it'll be, maybe you'll be an owner again. I'm speculating again, remember, this isn't inside information. In that scenario, how do you then prosecute me for breaking a rule? You don't have any proof I did. So it doesn't matter that from the outside, it looks fucking obvious. It's so obvious that this guy lived in the house, was paying for stuff, used to be the owner, got banned from being the owner. Suspiciously, the guy who was the minority owner could then afford to be the full-time owner, yet kept that guy around, and when they were waiting, and they obviously didn't agree with the ruling ever, it's pretty obvious from the outside that the person is probably going to do that. Problem is, you have to prove it. It doesn't matter if the... Okay, again, I'm probably not going to court for this, Bryce. I don't care. I think O.J. Simpson probably killed his wife. But guess what? It doesn't matter that I think that. You have to prove it with evidence. It looks pretty obvious to me. He even wrote a fucking book saying, if I did it. That made it even more compelling circumstantially, but that's not evidence. That doesn't matter. He even said there, if I did it, you know. So in this scenario, it doesn't matter if Chris Benari and them had an agreement. You can't ban it without the fucking evidence. And if you had the evidence, here's the final point on that little topic. If you had the evidence... This is the ultimate time to bring some of that evidence out. Yeah. Everyone just shuts the fuck up, obeys every Riot rule from then on, and it's like, you are the gods, Riot. You wrecked this guy on purpose. Instead, you purposely don't, and yet in this weird scenario, when you're trying to claim to be this sort of NFL-type body, now's the one time you invoke your sort of right to... Oh, I don't have to show you, though. I don't have to show you anything. Well, in that scenario, then, I won't believe that you are this fair body in that particular sense. So you might have done it. Produce the corpse, show me that he did it. And then on the secondary issue, just a very quick one, but I think it was very smart to emphasize the player issue, because like I said, if you told me that a player was being mistreated, so there was a famous case in League of Legends where a young player, there was actually a phone call of him being pressured to stay with a team because they implied, like, if you leave, we will actually take the money by taking your mother's house. Like, we'll come and claim it in that way. So this is a very famous issue. As soon as I hear that, even as an independent person with no evidence, I'm like, okay, something must be done about this. Like, this is very worrying. And even though I don't know what the case would be, obviously I'm going to put pressure on the whatever governing bodies are available. Like, you've got to look into this. You've got to make sure this person's safe. The big problem I have with that whole issue is I did go and talk to all the people involved in this particular case of the environment that this house and where they lived. Not a single person, except the one person who presumably is making these claims, said what was claimed by Riot. And yet Riot claimed multiple people did, and that they'd looked into all of it, they'd corroborated it all, they'd found evidence again. Again, I don't know what evidence you could find of like an argument taking place between two people. Again, there's no spy cameras that you have access to. I mean, who knows? Maybe the client itself like takes over your webcam, starts recording stuff low-key. I don't know what level Riot's at. I feel like they're not at that level yet. I know I've done some shit on my webcam that they definitely haven't got access to. So my point there is, on both those issues, I think they actually would have a very difficult time convincing me, especially because I've tried to logically think what evidence they could have, knowing all the people involved, and I actually have still not been able to think of a single piece of evidence that would be like convincing if it was a real world court scenario, you know, like if it's them just being able to decide. Like I said, they didn't need any of these factors. From day one, they could have just gone, we don't want you involved anymore, therefore you're out, and then unless you can sue us, you're not in. So that's my final thought on the Renegades issue in that particular sense, is that my biggest issue is, we've debated, like, should it exist? What are the hypotheticals? How should it be run? My biggest issue with the specifics of it is, I think this was one of the worst cases to not have any evidence, not have any process for, because it does seem like, at the moment, they would have to have some amazing evidence. Like, they'd have to have some crazy, like, witness or special piece of evidence. And if they did, it would be like the awesome movie. You know, this would be an awesome thriller for a movie. Because obviously the turn at the end would be, in my movie, I've set it up that Monty's innocent and that they didn't do it and they're never going to find the evidence. In the end, the plot twist in the movie would be they would have to have the evidence, wouldn't they? That would be the awesome ending to the movie, where it turned out they did have it and that their process was fine. The problem is, we haven't got to that part of the movie and we're never going to get to see Act 3, essentially. We're never going to get to see the trial. We're never get to see Bryce, like, break down on the...
Monty pulls his mask off and it's Chris the whole time.
You never get to see Bryce break him on the stand, you know, and like, oh God, yes, I did. She was only 15. Whatever, like, whatever the emotional outburst that he gets out of this.
Code Red.
Exactly, yeah.
Damn right I did.
Exactly, of course I ordered a Code Red. Anyway, so, you need me on the LCS. You need me there. It's like,
that's my Twitter every morning, Duncan. Just back to my Twitter. Like, every morning I have a cup of coffee. They need me on this wall. I'm going for it. Here we go.
Okay. Yeah. That's all esports needs, Scott. A few good men. A few good men.
Places to think about.
We're now going to move into CSGO, but mainly because CSGO is the game that WESA, the World Esports Association, has begun with. Now, interestingly enough, in their press releases and on their website, they do not mention CSGO ever. But it is quite clearly, when you consider the logistics, a CSGO issue right now. But in future, in theory, if it is the world and it's the Esports Association, one day maybe it will cover everything. So some people who are interested in League of Legends, it might be worth just knowing the basics of it. So let's go into this topic here. Is when this was announced, unfortunately, before it was announced, the leak happened of an image that showed some of the teams and showed ESL. And so people's initial speculation was, oh, I remember a story from Richard Lewis in 2015 that said ESL wanted an exclusive league. This must be an exclusive league. This must essentially be what like Pro League will become, etc. And oh God, they're starting it and it's going to come instantly. And so when it was announced, like it seemed like about 50% of everything ESL had to say was like putting out that fire that they never started, which was like, no, it's not an exclusive league. It's not that. And so unfortunately, I feel like immediately they got put on the wrong foot, which was they spent all their time saying, no, not exclusive, inclusive. It's all inclusive, mate. But then constantly kept defining inclusive as essentially something which is exclusive. So I feel like the whole area was really muddied in that particular area. So I'll give the most simple explanation as far as I know of what WESA is, which is that it's some sort of a structure where these teams have joined this association, which also features some people who are ESL employees along with representatives of the teams, which form up an executive committee, and then they have a commissioner of the league who is there to break decision ties of the executive committee, and the team owners have a meeting that they take place at where players are represented. But when I say represented, I mean as in they just get to say their opinion. And then the team owners and the executive committee in some way vote on things, but then the executive committee also has other things only they vote on. So this structure is going to exist, and it is going to decide, in theory, things like, well, there's going to be revenue sharing for some of the teams, so maybe they bring in a sponsor, and then how does that get broken up? In theory, the teams are going to be able to govern some aspect of themselves in this particular way. It's going to be able to decide how leagues are sanctioned, so what should the rule sets of leagues be? How should you qualify for them? So in theory, there's a little bit of everything for everyone involved in it, but since initially it's ESL people setting it up, that's how I want to start the discussion. So, Bryce, the big concern everyone has when this is announced, even people who are experts in esports, they're in other games, they're other league owners, everyone, even who was in the expert position, initially seemed to have to like convince themselves that it's not an exclusive league run by ESL. That was everyone's initial fear before they had the information. What do you like? What are your thoughts on WESA and the concept itself?
Concept is okay. I'm a believer in CS:GO esports needs more structure, not less. So the notion of a body that's going to think more comprehensively about things like player contract standardization, competitive integrity protection, consistent game rules, dispute resolution, right? I think that's all good things. I think those are all good goals that are worth working towards. The obvious flaw with this is that it's an ESL only effort. I mean, they said we tried to bring others to the table, but then there was the immediate, CEVO and MLG and Gfinity said, well, no, you didn't even talk to us about this, right? And then presumably the others they talked to turned them down, which makes sense. And
they also said, remember, that they actually will not have other leagues involved. In fact, they even then said they don't think it works. So they tried, it didn't work, and they will now essentially never have other leagues. It will only be ESL, but remember, it is not an ESL run thing. We just happen to also work for ESL. That's their words, not mine. Like, that's legitimately what they were essentially saying. I'm not like mischaracterizing what they said there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it makes sense when you think about it. Like when you think about where ESL views itself in the marketplace, they think of themselves at the top of the tournament organizer marketplace, right? Like they think of themselves
industry
as
leaders.
Huh?
Industry leaders.
Right, exactly. That's how they view themselves. And so they're extremely unlikely to what they would view as elevating their competition by joining or forming some kind of actual World Esports Association that's going to have, members of MLG and Turner and Faceit and Gfinity, right? Everyone's going to get a board slot, and you're going to have this big board, and it's going to, work kind of like the United Nations. We're going to have player representatives, team representatives, league representatives, and it's going to actually do what I would love to see happen, which is establish universal poaching rules and competitive integrity protection, minimum things we need to do. Figure out whether or not, for example, do we need, one of the issues that I've talked about is, do we need a drug testing policy in esports, right? Reasonable minds can disagree about that. I think what we can all agree on, though, is it's never been properly studied. We don't know in any form of statistically provable way what the scope of the problem is in terms of how many people are using drugs in esports and whether or not they actually improve gameplay, right? We have a ton of anecdotal evidence about this, but we don't have any actual studies. So like, I would love to see a body like this commission a study, figure out what the scope of the problem is, figure out if it's actually a problem and if it's, a threat to competitive integrity because amphetamines improve gameplay, for example. And if so, set up a drug testing policy that's comprehensive where you can't, get banned from an ESL event for violating their drug rules on a Wednesday and then go play in a Face It or MLG event on a Friday, right? Like that's the type of things I'd like to see happen. I agree with what you said earlier. I think the big issue here is ESL should just call a spade a spade. This is advancing ESL's direct business interests. They can do that along with advancing the industry. And for me, where I'll ultimately come down is I'm not pro or against WESA, right now. Like the reality is we just don't have enough public information. Like we know very, very little. And which is bizarre, by the way, for to come out of the gate trumpeting transparency and then to essentially spend your entire PR campaign regurgitating forms, restating an already vague PR statement about the launch is a real problem. I think, quite frankly, and a lot of people have said this too, this is an original thought, the most transparency we have about WESA so far comes from Mike's post on it, right? I think people felt like, okay, this is starting to make more sense. But the reality is, right, they came out in this big cloak of we're improving the industry without tackling the fundamental issue, which is this is an ESL initiative, right? There's all the, I'm sure we'll wind up talking about exclusivity, here, and whether or not that's good or bad. I can get into my opinion on it later. But just when I think about WESA, for me, it's not about exclusivity. It's about how do we balance out what harm it might do to the ecosystem by propping itself over other organizers, right? And trying to create some artificial competition, imbalance by the relationship with teams and therefore their players. And then on the other hand, what good can it do for the industry, right? What are the advantages associated with having an entity that's solely focused on these things? And, the connections to ESL are obvious. I think they missed the mark. They should have sold what it is instead of trying to sell something that no one was going to buy it as. Because
they tried to sell what they think it could be, essentially, instead of what it is.
Sure, which in theory down the road maybe, but for now, let's just call it what it is and try to convince people, because it got lost. People, I watched your entire video on this, Thorin, right? And one of the things you were saying is you need to convince us that there is a problem that you're going to solve, right? That's the first step. And they didn't do it, right? They threw out kind of, we want to standardize player contracts and we want dispute resolution, right? But they didn't engage the conversation that we had. We spent 30 minutes talking about dispute resolution, right?
Well, for example, okay, so they would say they said, it'll be like the NHL. Okay, so now tell me what the NHL fixed by becoming the NHL. Exactly. That's the part they didn't use the mechanisms of even their own analogies.
Right, exactly.
They just said things like, "Wouldn't it be nice if it was the NHL?" As though you're then supposed to think, NHL, big league, millions of dollars, revenue shares, real sport. None of those mechanisms wouldn't cross over. They didn't convince even the insiders in that sense.
Right. Instead of saying, here's what the NHL has that we love. One, they're really good about competitive integrity, right? They have drug testing, and I don't know the NHL well, but let's just say they do, right? Yep. It's not like baseball where people think everyone's on steroids. We're pretty confident that the match results are the match results. They're not being fixed. There's no one's cheating. There's no refs being bought off. Whatever. They have good dispute resolution mechanisms in place, which mean that grievances between players and teams or the league are short. They're resolved fairly. They're resolved with relatively low cost, so the season can continue to move on. They've got transparency, right? They show the behind, it's publicly traded or whatever, so we have information in their books. Players can determine whether or not they're being fairly compensated, all that stuff, right? There are things that WESA has the potential to do that would be extremely beneficial for the industry and for CSGO esports in particular, and I would love to see those things come to fruition. I don't think of ESL as an evil organization. I don't think of, generally speaking, don't think of team owners as evil people, right? I certainly don't think of Mike as an evil person. I believe two basic facts. One, I believe Mike is a good actor in this industry, and two, I believe he's trying to act in the best interest of not just his organization but the industry. I don't believe that he would do something that benefits his team but sacrifices some overall good of the growth of esports, right? Because he doesn't want to cut off his nose to spite his face. He's going to be.
Don't be ridiculous, Bryce. At the end of the day, if we reply to what you just said, then sometimes hastr0 wouldn't upgrade a player because he wants to have two teams that are really good. He wouldn't do that, would he?
No.
He might act also in the interest of the industry. Sure. He's also going to prioritize his own self-interest, right?
And what I mean is, I'm not saying that he wouldn't do something that harms the industry by this much in order to help his business by this much, right? And that's the point I'm trying to make, which is I don't think he's gonna cut off all of the future economic value and really harm the industry in a substantive way in order to gain some short-term benefit for you have to think long-term, right? So I believe that they think they're doing good for the industry, and I believe that they have the potential to do good for the industry. How I'll fall down on WESA is well, let's just, I don't care what you say. Show me what you do, right? How is this going to play out? Are you actually going to carry through? Are you going to be effective? And for me, the real tragedy of this is I think they had more potential to do some of these good things and build goodwill, even if they weren't going to bring MLG or Faceit or Gfinity or whoever into the fold, right? They could have brought them together under competitive integrity, innocuous issue, try to create standards across the board and enforce them across the board. But because they framed it this way, everyone's like, screw you. Like, you didn't meaningfully try to involve us. And we think that this is just set up to advance your own best interests, and we're worried about getting screwed, so we're not going to work with you, which will undercut their potential to do actually positive things and move the needle. So, I wish that I wish the PR campaign had gone differently, because, I like some of these people who work there, and I believe they had the potential, and I think they're fighting an uphill battle now where it could have been starting from a neutral place, or even, going downhill where they get people on their side, and it's okay, let's build on this momentum.
Okay. So I know, listen, we know Mike wrote an article about it, and he's obviously in favour of it because he's actually a member of WESA. So before we get to him, Scott, what do you think on the premise and how they initially presented it?
Well, I think the initial, obviously, presentation blew up in their face, whether they thought whether they knew they were going to have a fight in front of them, or whether their PR literally got pushed months ahead because of that leaked banner. Or sure, yeah, was that press release always going to be that Friday? I don't know. Or whatever day it was in London. Was it always planned? Maybe they didn't have to rush to build a website and get organized and get themselves on message and figure out what their fucking message was. But, if it looks like a duck, if it smells like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it's a fucking duck. Now, we all have, for all of our time in esports, some longer than others, we have all said, organization would be a little better here. If the guys throwing the events got along a little better, talked a little more about schedules and rule sets, if the owners stopped being such rivals with each other, maybe just chatted a little bit more about standardized player treatments and contracts and how to negotiate transfers and all those things. And if the players got together and worried about themselves a little better and got a little more organized, a little more vocal, if everyone got their own collective bargaining going from their power silos, because there's three. There's players, there's organizers, TOs, and there's teams. And
there's
all
publishers too.
Well, and yeah, so so that's a triangle. The box around that, I just watched Silicon Valley. I made this box today.
I like
the box around that is who owns the game, right? And then all the businesses jump all over it that support those things. They could be making shirts. They could be making video. They could be all sorts of stuff that's, again, you're either supporting a team, a tournament organizer, or a player, or in some regard of that ecosystem. Without those three, it all falls apart. And without the players, it absolutely falls apart. So I'm all for what I want WESA to be, which is an organization that has all the premier tournament organizers and has all the premier multi-gaming organizations, the MGOs, or if it's just Counter-Strike, the top CS ones. And real deal, a Counter-Strike player association that can actually live away from all these things don't have to be under one thing even, right? But if they all lived under one place, that's how we properly regulate an open marketplace of competition, if that's what you want for this game, right?
So Scott's problem is that what it presents itself is what Scott wants, but unfortunately it doesn't sound like it is that what it's presenting itself
yeah,
as.
I think we have a difference between a government, I'll use the word government even though we know governments are not involved, a governing government-type series of bodies, or one body with divisional silos, again, organizers, teams, players.
Okay.
Put media over there. Put talent over there. I don't care how you do it. Everyone's got a union these days. And you've got like-minded businesses who, via all the right reasons, realize if they collectively get together on some things, they can grow this in a different way and a better way for them. WESA, to me, is a bunch of businesses who are at the top of their game, organizing to stay there. Now, that is not an evil, nasty fucking thing. That is business, right? Now, do I sit here and go, well, God, if WESA ends up having an exclusive league in 3 years and there's really not much else to play, is that going to kill Counter-Strike and it's all going to be doom and gloom? No, but it's going to be a different landscape, right? And I like this open landscape because with more variety, like, everyone gets a little better. If ESL had no one to push them 5 years ago, their broadcast wouldn't look good. DreamHack got pushed by ESL. MLG, they all pushed each other this year. Now they're getting stupid and spending too much money on shit in their stadiums. But you know what I mean? The competition is good in a lot of ways. And again, back to the part of this show that we talked about, exclusive leagues, this to me seems to be a way to line up, again, the power people of Counter-Strike Global Offensive and work it towards a chunk of exclusiveness. And again, they're not evil. They're not fucking going to kill esports. They're not going to kill Counter-Strike. I'm just not a fan of there being one ring to rule them all, and everybody else kind of is involved. Everybody else can still play a little bit, but we're going to really flip the dynamic in a couple of years for this game, and I don't know if I like it. And then, because again, if you look at it, it's way too heavy on ESL. The player component is laughable at best. Now, here's the thing. WESA happens. Fuck your little player council. Let's help these players organize themselves independently for real for once. Let them vote someone in from a much bigger... Eight teams of players do not make up pro Counter-Strike. So 8 teams of players shouldn't represent everyone. So maybe a bigger body over here for players at least. They vote in who represents them to this big magical WESA, you know? But I think if you got bigger than WESA, 12 teams, 15 teams, 20 teams, it just helps all along. And again, like, I know that I've been critical of MLG, but I've been critical of ESL. I've been critical of all these companies I've worked for over the years, right? And certainly I've been critical of ESL lately. But if MLG did this, I would lose my shit the exact same way in public. And again, I look at this, much like I think everybody else, that this isn't just ESL. It's actually all ESL properties or touching MTG properties. So this really does protect DreamHack, and it does protect ESEA/ESL Pro League and all those. Like, so it's bigger than just ESL, even in the sense of companies making money off of Counter-Strike. Again, and for me, my side of it, sitting way out here, no longer with a business stake in the game. I don't want an exclusive end-all, be-all for Counter-Strike. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, and it actually doesn't mean it's not best for the sport. But I think this is trying to do a little bit of both. It's trying to tell us we're altruistic, we're philanthropic, we're here to grow it all, help everybody. But really, it's aligning some really smart businessmen to make sure that they actually stay the dominant horse. And maybe they should be. If you're for exclusive leagues, it would be these teams and then some. And it would probably be someone like an ESL running it. Got no problem with that. But I just think, again, I thought the drug stuff was overblown to get media exposure and to show that we're the great guys of esports and we are the fucking ones in charge. And I think this is kind of like that in a different way.
So can I jump in there really fast, Scott, and just ask you a quick question? You know, one of the points you just made was that the player involvement is laughable. And you said that the player council essentially doesn't have any power. I'm wondering, do you have sources on that? Do you know, like, has someone leaked to you the governing docs? Do you have access to what decisions are or not?
Just kind of talking about it, and what it sounds like is they don't have a vote. They don't have a seat on the board that gives them votes. They have a voice.
They were very careful in how they phrased it, that they never ever said a player actually votes on what happens.
Yeah, so that's the problem.
That would be the first thing you would say if you really represent players. You'd big that up, wouldn't you?
Well, so thing is what they launched last week that they got so much shit for, they could have drastically changed today. And we don't know. So the first time we get, if they ever give us the documents, they could go, guys, we told you. This is it. Yeah, but dudes, was that it? Was it really it? Or did you change it? Oh, bitched. So like, I don't know. Maybe they have more power than what sounds like, but it doesn't seem. It certainly doesn't solve the idea of a players' association.
So it definitely doesn't solve the idea of a players' association. I don't think anyone thinks that the players' association should stem from some ESL or like Mike said, right? It's not like they should go and do it separately. That's the whole point. It has to be independent. So I kind of put the player conversation. We should maybe have the conversation about the players' association later. I put that in another bucket for now. As Thorin says, I'm the master compartmentalizer, right? So we'll put it over there. But when it comes to player power, Mike, I mean, I don't know is the answer to this, right? Like, but I am hesitant to criticize them for failure to involve players when we don't know the actual governing structure. Because, for example, so having worked on league docs before, right, it is possible that all of the authority rests with the board. If all of the authority rests with the board, the fact that the players don't have a vote is a huge problem, right? Because if all the decisions are made by two team reps, 2 ESL reps, and a hand-picked commissioner from ESL, right? Then the players aren't getting a meaningful say in structural decision-making. But if a lot of the decision-making is done through the player council, if the way in which the docs, and I don't know what it's called in Germany, but in the US for business called an operating agreement, articles of incorporation, depending on how what kind of business structure it is. But if there's actual tangible power vested in the player council, not just we'll consult with them from time to time on various issues, then maybe they are looking out for the players. Maybe this is way better than we thought. And I don't know the answer to that, but I've seen a lot of people criticize a lot of things about this, and I'm just not. We don't know. Like, it's so easy to sit on the outside and say there's a board of 5 people, where's the player on it? But without knowing there's also going to be, by the way,
I think you're going too far.
The transparency part comes in, right? Businesses don't have to be transparent. They're businesses.
Yeah.
Organizing bodies like this that help regulate things need to be transparent. And that's where this merge just doesn't sit well with me.
So I agree. I would love to know exactly how that governance structure is broken down. And I would love for that to be public, right? But and maybe this is because I haven't been in esports for 10 years, so I'm not quite as cynical about this stuff as some other people are. And maybe no, but rightfully so, because you've seen the dirty laundry of everyone for the last decade. I've seen it for 3 years.
Owners like Mike, which makes me very cynical of like team power over player power.
Yeah, and just so we're on the same page, like I rep team owners, but I've fired clients before, right? Because I cannot sit on this show and tell you that I think every team owner is a good actor. I can tell you that where I currently sit, I believe all of my clients are good actors, but there have been clients that I've talked to them and we'll go through the back and forth in the player contracts and they'll change things and I'll say, well, no, like the reason I structured this way is because I didn't want you to have this like absurd discretion to do X, Y, Z. You don't need your players' IP rights in perpetuity to be able to sub-license for commercial purposes, right? And they'll be like, yeah, but I want them. And I'm like, well, no, but like that's bad and they're not going to read this and they should, right? So I've had that conversation and I've dumped clients over it, right? So like I get that there are bad actors out there, and I get that ESL might actually have built a structure where the players have no say at all. I get that structure could exist here. Maybe I'm just super naive, but it would be so weird to come out and trumpet player involvement in this and then add the actual structure be that they have no say in anything.
But let's look at the business of it, okay? The ownership and the guys that run ESL will run it year in, year out, year in, year out, year in, year out. Guys like Ralph, Carmack, James, that's a career path in that company for them, right? So even if the players have some power, and obviously team owners don't come and go every year. The player pool will rotate every fucking year. Sure. So even at its power base, it's a rotating one, which again, if it doesn't have a loud voice in there, it's even weaker because it's a rotating door of them, right?
Okay. Sure. So here's the thing. Mike can't just not talk for 20 minutes. I'm going to have to get him in a second here. Okay. So I want to quickly make a point though, Bryce, which is I think you've way oversold that whole issue there. What you're trying to argue there is, guys, let's not be so critical. We don't know the issues. If you were really presenting something that was so in favor of players, you would not get that. Had the least information, Bryce, which suggests they either don't know or they don't want to tell you. Everything else, even the executive board part, was like, these are who the members are. This is how the tie will be broken. They gave no information there. Secondly, is a very quick point. Literally every other person in this association wants to some degree to have power over players, and it is in their self-interest and their collective interest to have power over players. So I'm sorry, I don't think ESL set out a thing where the primary goal was to make players more powerful over them and the teams. I think that's actually, I agree. That would be extremely naive to imagine. So until they prove it, and by the way, that's the key thing. If we bring it up now, and then we say, oh, what about players? Oh, sorry, did we miscommunicate that? Well, they have this information. They haven't done that, and it looks like they never will do that. So, okay, Mike, it's the general premise. What do you think of the premise of this? Because obviously you think it's good. You're involved in it, right?
Well, I just listened to you guys talk for 20 minutes about it, and I hear the word power a lot, and that the power has never crossed my mind one time. The word power, the fact that I can have more power, I don't look at this that way whatsoever, and I don't think a lot of the other team owners do. I think what we were presented with was an idea that we could begin something to have more structure, and when we were having the League of Legends chat for the past 2 hours before this, what I heard from you guys in regard to League of Legends is that you were basically describing all the problems that we wanted to address with Visa, and in the sense that you want that for League of Legends and the checks and balances and arbitration and all these things that you want for League of Legends. That's what the premise was behind Visa. Now, am I saying that this is immediately the best thing and I think ESL should have the interest in it and this and that? No, but what I'm saying is that we have to start somewhere to start creating those processes and the regulations that we just spoke about for League of Legends, right? Or in esports as a whole. And I think that I could care less. I'm a competitor, okay? I've been operating in esports and running our team for years on the premise that anybody else can go and compete with me, and there's no regulatory standard there to prevent them from trying to beat me in the sense of business, in the sense of taking my players and signing them and growing their fan base or whatever you want to call it. I'm a competitor. I welcome it. It's fine. That's okay. I didn't do this because I want to solidify my place at the top. If I deserve to be there, I deserve to be there. If I don't, I don't, and I'm fine with that. What I want to do is create standards where not only can we protect people who between players, tournament organizers, and team owners. I want all of them to be protected, but there's a financial component to this that I will recognize and I will talk about openly with you, in the sense that, you know, the players are limited, so limited in an open ecosystem right now, in how much money that they can actually make. The biggest increase that we've seen in the way that players drive revenue for themselves is prize money, and it shouldn't be that way. There should be opportunities where players have a direct source of revenue and align to that revenue that they know will come directly to them, and it does not exist in esports right now. I'm the direct line of revenue as an organization for them in prize money and the tournament organizer. Now,
so would WESA get the sponsor and then they would rev share with you, and this is what we're talking about? Is this the stream we're discussing?
Yes. But you're you're reskinning the same money. The reason the player doesn't have direct sponsors is because right now you won't let them. And I say you figuratively, bro.
No,
yes. Don't say no to me. Teams own all player rights. So if I wanted to go to Jordan Gilbert right now and I make this fucking phone, I can't very easily at all try to negotiate with Jordan and personally sponsor him, which would open a wealth of personal player sponsorships for the pros that are the most engaged, that deserve it the most.
Sure,
I have to go to you. What kind of revenue streams are we talking about?
What about ticket sales? Knowing that when somebody buys a ticket to go watch you in an arena.
But let's start with let's not go tangentially, because ticket sales include a vendor of an arena. Let's talk about directly me, the player, right? Let's start at the core. You brought up the conversation about players aren't making enough money, but part of that is they're all locked into single perif sponsors or no perif sponsors. So that limits, like, again, there's players that could probably get money from a single perif sponsor that a perif sponsor gives an entire division to, right? Because they have that collateral.
Sure.
Fanatics making their own perfs, right? Because they're tired of it. So there's tons of player avenues of revenue that are not currently open, that you don't need a WESA for at all, bro. Right? And again, some teams are better than others and will actually go work individual sponsors for players. Some don't. And again, I had no problem with...
Yeah, but let me address that too. I mean, yeah, you're right, but it's only in a few categories, right, that players don't have that individual sponsorship access to. And I think that there's a trade-off there that's fair between an organization and player, and the amount of money that I pay my players. I mean, the amount of money that we get from our sponsors to pay my Counter-Strike team, like, I would say that it's way beyond fair. Like, I don't even know what the percentages of what we actually gross or net at the end of the year based on our sponsorships versus our player salary. But I can tell you that pretty much my Counter-Strike's player salary is equal to the amount of sponsorship dollars that we get in total for our whole organization, just about. You see what I'm saying here? So there have to be checks and balances. And not only that, but my players are getting individual sponsorships, and I've approved all of them. Pretty much.
Yep, you are this rarity. That doesn't happen.
But that's the thing. People have to compete with me. Other team owners have to compete with that notion of how I'm running my team, and that's your checks and balance. That for other organizations, and I think eventually you weed those guys out. I think we've weeded tons of terrible team owners out throughout the years, and we're going to continue to do that. There's still a few more that we'll weed out, and that's the process of doing it. But what WESA is actually addressing is, creating streams of revenue for players that aren't traditional, not sponsorships, they will have access to sponsorship revenue, right? But access to other things to create revenue through direct line to the players directly from the tournament organizer, but also through the organizations who will drive revenues higher and be able to afford to pay their players more. And there's competition amongst the organizations for the services of those players because they're making higher revenues. If this team can make more money, if Fnatic can go out and make a lot more money based on these revenues that we're creating through WESA, and I can make more money through certain revenues that we're creating through WESA, then one team is going to want to spend more of that money on a player they really want. Does that make sense? And then I have to compete with that, even though we have access to the same pools of revenue in that sense. There's still obviously all these outside pieces in the economics that, where I make money, where Fnatic doesn't. Fnatic makes money where I don't. But at the end of the day, we're creating these revenue streams. And if, let's say, I get an additional $5 million in revenue by having, access to ticket sales. We're selling out all these arenas, and we're driving revenue with media rights, right? Television comes in and buys into Visa and says, okay, we want to run this on television. Okay, so we want to run your Visa, ran league, sanctioned league on television, and if Fnatic gets 10 million, I get 10 million, for example. Okay. And both of us want Kenny S on our team. And at the end of Kenny's contract, Fnatic comes out and they're like, we're going to pay you a $500,000 signing bonus and $20,000 a month. That's the checks and balance to me in that situation where players are growing in that regard, and they have a direct line to revenue in the economic.
Okay, listen.
But again, you just explained some really cool business stuff, but that has nothing to do with the government body. Like, again,
for sure. And let's talk about that.
Worlds.
Yeah.
Right, listen, wait a second. I'll keep it in my mind. I'll store the rev share thing because that's a very important topic. So we'll do that next. The first thing I want to do, let me just run it back a second. So the initial question was about the premise of WESA. So you were explaining like one of the benefits here. So the premise of WESA, okay, is that ESL, however indirectly, whatever level of abstraction is there, have set up an association. Your team is one of the teams that have joined it. There's some sort of structure, which has been outlined by Bryce. We don't really understand. We just had a graphic of a pyramid. I actually told some ESL people in person, by the way, if you don't want people to be worried that you're setting up some sort of shadowy cabal, don't use a pyramid and put yourself at the top of it. That kind of has negative connotations in the world. Just a little thing. Lots of other different hierarchical structures and graphs and all sorts of things you can show. That's not the best one, Just a little point. So anyway, they've set this up, and then the key thing is, the secondary point is the way they've presented it initially. So the premise itself, I mean, I can see you're getting into the details here, and we're going to definitely do that. But the premise of ESL doing it, and them being the first ones to do it, and it's like they have some people involved in it, and the structure. What do you think of this, Mike? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I think that if I had, let's just put it this way. I have really enjoyed multiple tournament organizers' events and think that they have done an amazing job. Okay, and I also think that ESL has done a ton for the Counter-Strike scene, and not only the Counter-Strike scene, but esports in general, in the sense that these guys took a big gamble in investing into esports the way that they have. And I think that you can't just sit there and tear them apart for wanting to be involved in an idea that they had, that they presented to help, and you can't knock them down for having a financial interest, the economic interest and impact of what they're doing in the sport, for this. I mean, for being able to come out and offer this to the teams first, to have the idea to do it first, to begin to try and formalize some of these things for players and organizations. And you can't tear them down for being the ones that had the insight, the foresight to do that. They're the ones who thought this up, and no other organizer, no MLG, Gfinity, Sivo, all these guys, coming out saying we were never consulted. Well, guess what? You didn't have the idea, that you never thought to offer us a share in the revenues, as an organizer, or players or organizations to help create a better infrastructure for us to survive as organizations. It's very difficult to manage the budget that I manage. It's tough. It's hard. We don't make tons of money. It's not, all glitter and gold. It's hard to do what we do. And all of these other organizers, I'm not knocking them, I love them all, but they've never tried to help us out. And we can see money flowing. We don't have access to their books, we don't audit them, but there's certainly an amount of money that's flowing. And I think what drove me personally, and I'll say it, to try to get this started and to get involved was the sense that I know bigger money is coming. And if we don't put these standards in place, the only people whose pockets are going to get filled are most likely those organizers who have control of the whole scene and are the ones who are able to sell the rights to broadcast their events.
Okay.
So you want to be positioned to be that guy. Let's call it what it is.
Yes.
And ESL absolutely wants to be positioned to be that company too.
No. I don't want to be the sole one though. Don't get me wrong. Like I just want to be able to have access to claim that, the claim that we're talent, we're part of this. We're helping to build the value of what, for instance, an ESL Pro League or the ECS that Facet's doing is selling to television when they come in and offer $2 billion for a 10-year deal to air it, and if right now, if that happened and that deal went down, we would get this, right? Based on contractual agreements. They don't owe us anything. And if we want to be in the ECS or we want to be in the ESL Pro League, we have to compete in that, or they'll go to another team and say, you come compete and sign this deal, right? And so there have to be some safeguards in that sense. When I feel like that is coming in our industry, I see it happening, and we don't have anything there to associate us with that kind of revenue that's going to come, that kind of opportunity for not only us as organizations, but the players themselves. Right.
Okay, so I noticed that actually all of Mike's points go towards rev share in the end. Just interesting the way people's minds work. It's like he just gets that's the magnet dragging him at all times.
Well, I'm a businessman at the end of the day.
I understand
and I'm running a business, and it revolves around money. That's what businesses are.
Sure, yeah. It's okay. I'm keeping track of this. Don't worry, man. I'm not going to let these points drop. But I just want to, before we get into that, I want to go around and I want to check what people thought of the way this has been presented, though. Because one of the biggest problems with this, it's like the first issue of the Riot thing, is that if Riot keeps presenting this worldview that they are a big league, that is like a sports league, and that has things done officially, then people will expect that to be the way it runs in the end. And if you actually know the whole time it's Riot and they run everything and they own everything, now you shouldn't have those expectations. Just because they told you, I'm a really nice guy, and I want to take this really slow and date you for a long time, they're going to try and fuck you on the first date. Like, if you know what the person's like, then you have a reasonable expectation for whether you should hang around with them or whether you should not. So in that scenario, Scott, when this was presented, thinking about what they reasonably probably want, did they do a good job in presenting it? Like, were they clear enough? Do you understand what the concept of it is without just having to be an insider and intuit all these things? On the surface, did they do a good job of presenting it?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the outsider, it sounds like it's some sort of cool organizing body to lift up esports. But I think when I connect some of the dots and I go, okay, there's more here. These are businesses getting together. This is not just it's not even just a FIFA. Even if you want to put FIFA in a good light, it's not even a FIFA. It's way different than that in that sense. It's not an NHL in that sense. I thought they were really vague from the start. And again, like I said, maybe they just got super rushed into having to like get public facing real quick, and so therefore they weren't ready for a message. But again, like I don't need 5 different ESL people to tell me that ESL isn't involved. It's one thing to see the guys on the board, but every public person talking is ESL related, and that doesn't like I love Kennegat. Yeah. Got no problem with Kennegat. Had no idea he was involved in WESA. Why is he involved in WESA? Why is he giving interviews? Right? Don't tell me this isn't an ESL business related thing and somehow philanthropic too. ESL Anna doing PR work. It's very much an ESL project. And again, I want ESL and these top teams to go, you know what? We're fucking going for it. We are ESL. We're taking team brands. We're going to sell them to the big world. We're going to rev share our tickets. We're going to rev share our broadcast rights. And we are fucking going for it. Fuck you, Face It. Fuck you, MLG. Fuck you, Gfinity. We will be the place to play top-level Counter-Strike. Bring it to us. We will have all the money. We will have all the production. We are building it. And you will all come. I would rather have them say that than go that way, because you're going that way. And we're going to help everybody else along the way and make sure no players get fucked and have good contracts.
I'm with you, Scott. I got you. But the one thing that I want to mention that while we're having this discussion, because this is probably what the community is latching on the most, is this whole exclusive thing. Let's clear that up, right? Sure. I mentioned it to you guys already before we even kind of jumped in, is that my team can play with other tournament organizers even after 2 years. Let's get that out of the way. In 5 years, the way we're set up in this association, I can choose where our team goes to play, and I'll consult with my players of which tournaments they want to play in. Okay, so we can go out and participate with other tournament organizers. And now there's a component. Now let's talk about this. So we can always modify this in any way we want, right? So going back to what you said about the players, right, and the way that they're set up in this structure, and the nice little graphic that got put out by the Visa Twitter. If you actually take a look at it, I'm going to link you guys if you don't know what I'm talking about, with the arbitration on either side, players counsel, going straight to the executive board and straight to the advisory board. So in this situation right now, players have an advisory board seat where every team can elect a player representative, and then they choose like one chairman of the players
That person doesn't vote, though, right? They just speak.
Their advisory board, yes. So listen, so I will tell you right now, and I hope I don't get crucified by all of them, but I think all the other team owners are going to, and you know, anyone like from ESL is going to say, Mike, you're fine. I'm going to say that we're already talking about taking that player role from the advisory board and moving it to the executive committee because of the response that we've seen. And, I already said, look, I posted this in communication and said, look, basically a memo saying, why wouldn't we have the players on the executive board? Why not? I think it would be positive. And the response I've already seen from other team owners and from the association itself is saying, look, let's consider it. Let's talk about it. So, for me, that's the process of this. We can rip it apart right now, but you haven't seen what we can do with it and in modifying it. And who knows, maybe next year and 2 years, Faceit is involved and they buy into it, and MLG is involved and they buy into it, and they can work.
Wait, Mike, how can they be? It says in the press release that they can't be other involved. But they even think philosophically it doesn't work.
About the concept, not
as in they do their own association. You mean?
No. Maybe they do, and maybe they merge. If you go back and look at the NFL right now, right? Okay. At one point there was the AFL and the NFL, and they were very much their own associations. And one of them started that standard of creating an association and having teams and organizations and players involved. And then eventually they said, we would be much more powerful if we went and did this together. But you can't just sit everybody at the table over the course of 1 year, which this took well over a year to formulate, and expect everyone to have the same views and just say, yeah, we're in. And it's the same thing with teams. Plenty of teams were in the visa discussion, okay? I'll tell you that straight up. Plenty of teams were involved in the discussion and offered an opportunity to get involved. And many teams will still get that opportunity in the future. And they just turned it down. One deal that I thought was good might not be good for another team. And, that's just the way it's starting. And I think that we can evolve this process. And that's all I want to do. I don't want to sound like I'm just defending it, but I'm defending the concept of evolution and how we can get better with it.
So you brought up the exclusive stuff, and again, it's been wildly reported or speculated by a lot of us, myself included, because we've heard it from, I think, pretty inside sources that, and again, we can always say we can change it, we can adapt it, we can flow it, the minute you sign a contract, that gets a lot harder to do. So let's just get to it. You have basically now just said that you guys can play in any tournament you want. Now, is the sticking point the word tournament, my friend? Because I'm going to put you on the spot. Per your contract right now, forget that you got paid a fee and all that. We won't talk about money because obviously that's part of this, and rev share and all those good things. Does this not turn into an exclusive league agreement? I will use the keyword league agreement after 2 years. And so, as it currently stands, if the ESL Pro League was not run by ESL, which is arguably one of our top pro leagues, online and then at LAN. Just happened. If it was not an ECL event, per this contract, would you guys be allowed to participate in it without having to fight, without having to ask, without having to get approval? Exclusive tournament versus exclusive.
I mean, this already exists, Scott. Basically, could they compete in an ECS in 2 years?
Well, ECS.
Yeah,
as well.
Sure. As it stands, we would not be able to in a league structure. Okay. But we would be able to play in tournaments, as many tournaments as we wanted to, I'll say this, and with as many organizers of tournaments that we want to play with, okay? Now, with that said, like I said before, there is a way for us to modify our articles and regulations to be able to allow more leagues, And ESL was, I guess, very accommodating in the sense that, we took this idea to them originally and said, we want to be able to play in more things and keep an open ecosystem. And I think that's a good way of doing it. And so take Turner, for example. They have an amazing thing going with E-League. We wanted to play in E-League, so we're able to play in E-League. And that's a league. That's it's set up like a tournament format and with group stages. It's not really, I would say, a league with standings. But, I think that if it's widely successful, and there's a reason for us to be involved in that, why would we not kind of kick that back and with ESL and say, look, as organizations, we want to be able to participate in this.
Okay, so, Bryce, Oh, wait a second. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, you're good.
But currently, right now, that scope of an event, a league type structure, online/offline, not allowable without discourse.
In 2 years when it's exclusive.
In 2 years, yeah. Now, right now,
remember that caveat, yeah.
Yeah.
In 2 years, and I'll mention this too, okay? Like let's say if we really wanted to be greedy, if we were really truly greedy in this situation, right? The clear way of doing this, if you were really wanted to maximize our money, would just be to go exclusive now while we have all this interest, and just say let's just go completely exclusive in anything. And the only place you can watch our teams play Counter-Strike is in this structure, because then the money from sponsors and so on is maximized. If the sponsor wants the title sponsorship of that league, they're gonna have to play a super premium because that's the only place you can watch Fnatic play Envy or NIP play Fnatic, right? But
Valve wouldn't let you do it right now, for one, probably, in this ecosystem.
Well,
it's better to set up an organization like this and steer right towards it. Drive the ship right towards it.
Yeah, but that's not happening anyway. Because like I just cleared up, we can play in MLG tournaments, we can play at FACEIT tournaments, we can play in other tournaments. You can still watch our teams play. And to me, that's the highlight of Counter-Strike. Online,
it's definitely encouraging to hear, for sure, bro. I'm not trying to
yeah, I know. I would never have agreed to this if it was just we can only play in these ESL events. When I walked into MLG Columbus, I'd send shivers through my spine. That is an event that I'll never forget, and I want to be able to continue to see our team play in events like that. And I think that the overarching kind of thing is that we're evil and we're trying to make this exclusive just to make a ton of money, and that's just not the case. We still want to make sure that our players are seen around the world in tournaments that we think are good tournaments.
Okay, so Bryce, here's the thing.
Duncan, really fast. Is Mike cutting out for everyone or just for me?
He's a little bit. He's a little robot.
It's gotten a bit better.
Okay, because for the last 3 minutes, I couldn't hear a lot of what Mike was saying. I don't know if he needs to reset his router or something, but it was super patchy.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Right,
sorry.
So the question I have for you is along those lines, the way it was presented. Here's the thing. Maybe you can comment on a different angle. I actually thought another reason why they commented so vaguely is that. I said it in my video. They didn't want to be nailed down to stuff that they weren't going to do, but they wanted to sort of imply they were going to do some stuff that sounds really great, but without ever actually promising they're going to do it, if you know what I mean. How do you think this was presented? The PR aspect, the concept of the league. What do you think, Bryce?
I think the PR on this was pretty much a mess. I don't know how you could possibly view the public outcry on this over the last week, right? And or 5 days or whatever, and not think it was anything other than a mess. Because if they think they're doing, there's two scenarios. One, they genuinely are trying to do something altruistic, right? And that's really their main goal here. In which case, well, that's some pretty bad PR, because you're trying for altruism and you've wound up with everyone being not just skeptical, but openly hostile to everything you're trying to do. Sure. And then, or you're lying and this is purely to forge your business interests, and people have identified that and hate you for it. But either way, when we're talking about PR and this is about as negative of a reaction to anything that I can remember in esports, right? At least over the last few years. So I don't know how you could say this was successful PR. I don't know. I think it's a relatively black and white answer. Regardless of what they're trying to, what WESA is trying to accomplish, it is now harder for them to accomplish it because everyone hates it.
But huge difference in mainstream press coverage of this.
Sure, that's a good point.
And our coverage. And the exact same thing happened during the doping stuff. ESL made 3 major news cycles of mainstream press with how great they are with solving our non-existent doping issue, right? And everyone mainstream just lapped that up. ESL saving the world over there. Whatever esports is, they're just fucking saving it. And so I think there was some incredible press for them on the notion of WESA that elevates them way past all of our voices, right?
Wait,
and again,
Scott, but Scott, you think that's a non-existent issue?
I don't think it's anywhere near as rampant as ESL made it out to be.
We're talking about the drug testing issue.
Drug testing.
Yeah, but I don't think ESL made it that kind of issue. I think the media made it that kind of issue. And they took the reins in actually implementing a program to test.
One interview led to 2 little articles that led to ESL then making 3 major posts that every news company in the world picked up on. Who ran that news story? ESL did. They solved the non-existent problem, and they got shitloads of good press for it, bro.
Well, all I'm saying is that it's not a non-existent problem. I think it is a problem. I think so. I'm a team owner who's been running teams for years, and I think it's a problem. I think there are some teams where every single member of the team is on Adderall facing a team that's not at all, and they have an advantage. I think that is.
Do they have an advantage?
In esports, you're talking about.
Scientific.
CSGO.
You got some...
I think without a doubt, it gives an advantage. I mean,
okay, really fast.
We're digressing.
Go down that road. Yeah, we're not going to digress.
Let's go back. So the PR thing, to your point, Bryce, I think on the outside circle of PR, they got some great stuff, right? ESL yet again. And again, I'm not trying to make them evil or shit on them either. I just think they're trying to combine two things that maybe don't get combined by the same exact group of people.
And you know what, Scoots, it's a really good point. I was attacking it solely from the frame of mind of like, what is the esports community reaction? But you're right. They got like my Google News feed, right, which has I have, sections at the bottom that I have a whole bunch of different, I have Counter-Strike, League of Legends, esports, etc. I mean, it was so big that it was getting picked up in the League of Legends section, right? Because it was such big, the news was getting so many hits that they would, in the article would use the word League of Legends because it's talking about esports, and the whole thing would be about WESA, and it would show up. So yeah, no, they got very good mainstream news coverage, and there's value for them. There's value,
and again, and not a negative, negative. But part of WESA is to take EnVyUs rights and NIPS rights and help them elevate and sell a bigger product, again, as part of their rev share, right? Yeah. So if WESA looks like the big deal, and that's not you can call it a power thing, you can call it a market share thing, whatever you want to call it. If they are the brand representing the brands, and more the outside world thinks that, less of what we think even matters, right? Yeah, let me give a really concrete example of that. So one thing that I've written about a bunch, and I'm not even an immigration lawyer, right? But I have clients that go through immigration issues in esports all the time. People make the argument that Riot created P1 visas in esports, right? It's not true. First of all, there were players that got P1 visas in esports before Riot existed as a company. But put that aside. Players. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there are examples of that. So let's put that kind of factual misinformation aside. Okay. Riot, and the other thing is people think that Riot lobbied the government and made it happen. That's also not true. What Riot did, and this is actually extremely valuable, so I don't want to undercut this, right? I just want to have the facts out there. They created a league that looks a hell of a lot like a traditional sports league. They then proceeded to get massive amounts of mainstream news coverage about that league, about that company, about that game. So when you're building a P1 petition and you're submitting evidence of why this person qualifies as an internationally recognized athlete, you can say, see this event that they're going to? Here's this article about this exact event last year, which by the way was played in Madison Square Garden before a sold out arena. Here's an article in the New York Times about it, right? Here's what this looks like. And so it is easier factually to get a P1 visa for a Riot sponsored game because you get all that news coverage that all helps, right? Yeah, it is absolute. Like they're talking about whether something is internationally recognized. One of the main ways in which you do that is showing news coverage of the thing. Just like when you're trying to get an O1 visa and show this is an extraordinary person, if there are articles written about how amazing this person is, it's easier to get that. So there is certainly value to the members of WESA, to WESA itself, and getting that mainstream news coverage. And so from that standpoint, I think it was a booming success. Obviously there's a pretty huge dichotomy between the internal and external reactions.
Sure. I mean, my biggest problem with this whole thing, I'll boil it down, because I couldn't address this too much in my video, because a lot of my video was just trying to give my version of reading between the lines and what other people said. I think the biggest problem ESL had here is, when I think of it from my own perspective, and person in esports, they did a very, very poor job of trying to explain what they actually are. And they at all times tried to actually distract me and make me think there's something they are not. And so basically the outward projection is that this is the World Esports Association. Let's start with the semantics level. This is the world and this is esports. It's not ESL and it's not CSGO. It's the world and it's esports. Immediately I can stop right there and go, you aren't and you can't be. First of all, you can't be the world. You will never run Kesper. You will never run Ace in China. Not only that, but imagine in this scenario, okay, someone doesn't, say the government can't act on some local level. So in my local area, we make a little a council of people, and we're going to act on behalf of these people, and we're going to get business interests into this area. We can't then go, oh, we're going to actually go into Japan and start doing that as well. Because guess what? They have a little sort of thing like that called the Yakuza will cut your fucking head off with a samurai sword. So that's not happening, okay? So you're not ever going to be the World Esports Association because Kesper and Ace aren't going to join you. So forget the world part. Then go to the part where it's Esports Association. It's not. It's the ESL Esports Association. They've even, inadvertently, because I don't think they want to stress this point too much, by saying in the AMA that they don't think it works with other league organisers, it is the ESL Association right now. Now, they've tried to keep saying at all points in time, it's not that, and yet the evidence doesn't shine up with it. Like, the people who are on the board are still... It's not like there's an ESL employee on the board. The managing director of ESL is on the executive board. He's still the managing director. And then he's claiming, oh, don't worry, I don't act purely in the interests of ESL. I also like to act sometimes against the interests of ESL because I'm a really fair guy. Well, no, don't believe that in a second. So my big problem there is you're not what you presented yourself at. But here's the funny thing. I'm only thinking they're a failure on PR because I'm thinking from in esports, right? So in esports, they did a terrible job in that way. And if they wanted to win my respect, like I said with Riot before, they wanted to win my respect over, what they do is they come in and they say, listen, guys, in the AMA, which no one from the mainstream media is reading, they're all just looking at the press release and what we say in the press conference. In the AMA, I'm going to say, listen, guys, obviously, in the future, billions of dollars are going to come into this industry. Broadcasting TV rights are going to come into this industry. We can get deals that no team can get because they're like a small agent competing with our agents. We can get a huge deal because we're going to show that we're all together on this and we're all got the massive thing, and then we can cut up those billions to all of us, and we'll even put in a structure where it's more fair as to how people get it. It's not like Mike said, where we get the billions and then you just have to play in our league and I've got that leverage over you so I don't ever have to give you it. So if you'd have come forward and said all that, I would say this. This is something I always stress in every show and every aspect of business. I always say, if you just tell me your self-interest and you're honest about it, I can trust you to act in your self-interest. I know your self-interest isn't necessarily negative to me directly, therefore at least I can go, okay, fair enough, I know your self-interest, so I can understand that you didn't behave that way. Here's the one extra point I want to make though. That they didn't fail in any way, Scott. They only failed to describe it to me. And at the end of the day, what can I do to stop WESA? Almost nothing. Yeah. I can make a bit of a noise about it. What can a random pleb do? Nothing. They can just get angry and post a Reddit comment. So as a result, I think they succeeded, Scott, because they weren't trying to convince me that they're the World Esports Association. Yeah. What they were trying to do is, if they go to CBS and they say, I want to sell the broadcasting rights instead of being on Twitch to this league and I want $5 billion. Now, what happens is, CBS goes, right, let's start looking into it. They start like I did. They start at the name. They go, World Esports. Oh, that's it. It's the World Esports Association. This is the association of all esports in the world. I'm going to start working with it, and then we're going to look in from that. If it says ESL one, yeah, it's not as good. Even the name's not as good. Yeah. So what they were trying to present themselves is what they probably want to be one day. The huge governing body that does it all, and it's got everyone integrated, and it's all great, and it's not corrupt and all this. They're not that right now. So that was my biggest problem right there, is that I got to stop you. I'll stop you right a minute. Like, you're not what you say you are. Now, what you are isn't necessarily negative. There's definitely positives. And so, I mean, I figure this is where we can bring Mike back in again. So the positives, one of the key ones is revenue share, like I touched on there, right? Is that maybe ESL can get more money in a big sponsorship deal, especially collectively with a load of teams, than hastr0 can himself, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at this. Look at the way other sports have kind of evolved as well. I mean, baseball, for example, in America, I mean, the managers used to be... The owners of the team used to be their agents, right? They ran everything. They did all the tobacco promotions and sponsorships and all those things back in the 1920s for their players. And the players used to have to work two jobs in addition to being a professional baseball player at that time because they couldn't afford to, take a salary from their organization. And eventually that grew into, bigger endorsements coming in and more people attending the games, and that's very much the progress that we've made in esports in the past 5 years, right? And eventually agents come into play because things start happening between deals between the owners and the players and so on and so forth. I feel like we've taken a lot of that progression on right now, and it's kind of mimicking the way that things have panned out. And so when you go back and you look at that sport now, the players aren't so making whatever the value was, I guess, at the time period. But let's say, good Counter-Strike players making between 8 and 10 grand salary right now, and NBA players used to make, let's say, what used to be 50 grand in salary before they really, or NFL players or MLB players before these associations really started formulating things. That number went shooting through the roof astronomically, and I don't think anybody can say that in mainstream traditional sports and pro leagues now that players aren't taken care of. I mean, they make an insane amount of money where I think any of us can agree that these guys are getting pretty much what they deserve.
Whoa, wait a second. Listen, Mike, let's not get crazy. Listen, they get a lot, okay? Kobe Bryant gets $30 million. He doesn't get the $150 million he would get if it was a free market and he could negotiate all that shit himself. And there was no salary cap. So I get it. Listen, compared to a normal person, they get a lot of money. I agree.
Right. But yes, you're right. Okay, that's in most cases.
Sure, in a lot of cases, yeah.
In most cases, normal players, superstars in this scenario sometimes get limited. But, and that's just kind of the way that these things have evolved. And maybe they can evolve, pro sports can evolve later to where that doesn't happen. But yeah, the salary cap, that's a thing. So, but my point is that we have to prepare for that. And I do have the players' best interest in mind, in my opinion, or at least, something that's going to give them a better career in the long run. Because in my blog, I wrote that right now, when these guys are done with their careers, what are they going to do? They're certainly not making enough money right now to retire and never have to work another job, right? And my concern is that for many of these guys, they start at a young age and they don't ever get a formal education and they don't ever get training to where they can make the same amount of money that they're making now playing Counter-Strike, right? Like what are some of my players who are making $300,000, $400,000 a year going to do when they're done playing? Can they make $300,000 or $400,000 a year anymore? Can they support the same lifestyle that they've ever had, or they've always had playing Counter-Strike? Can they raise a family on, the money that they're going to make in a job where they don't have an education, because they played Counter-Strike the whole time? So I don't know. All these things run through my head, and all I want to do with an association like this is evolve it and make it work the way that it should, where it's fair for players, organizations, and tournament organizers.
Okay, so here's the thing. Well, before the other two jump in, which you can now do, I just want to make this point, okay? Let's address the point that Mike made there, which is imagining if this body ran the way it wants to run and the good side of it, which is, for example, negotiating rev share, for example. I gave the broadcasting example because it's the most money initially you can get. Ticket sales is another one, but obviously we're a long way away from that. But these are two things which one day, as Mike addressed with the League of Legends thing, should be way more than prize money. Prize money right now is like the thing that attracts you when you don't have any of this shit. One day, broadcasting rights, tickets, that's the most of the money, and then obviously merchandising and stuff like that. So on that level, if we ignore the ESL part for the moment, essentially, we just look at WESA and we imagine it doing this, going out and getting the rev shares. What do you think of that as a general concept, Scott? I mean, is that good? Is it something that's needed? What do you think?
Yeah, again, I'm all for like some sort of overarching bodies behind some of these businesses that do assist the entire thing. Again, like we've talked about, it would be great if the tournament organizers were organized and if the team owners were organized, other than Skype calls about shit once in a while and little groups here and there. And same thing with players. So on paper, the idea of like-minded businesses that all have a piece of the pie, trying to figure out the best way to grow it together, and rule sets and all those different things, protections, I'm all for it. I just, again, like I said at the very top of the show, I am not a fan of a closed, professional type league scenario. I'm just not interested in that the top dog thing for Counter-Strike. Now, thankfully, Mike has clarified that even if it goes league exclusive in a couple of years, tournament organizers that throw weekend events or invitational events, etc., that fits into obviously the schedule of Mike's crew, are still able to be attended because that gets teams out and about and does keep an ecosystem going, possibly for some of those other team owners. So I think, again, the idea of a collective group of businesses forming an association that is inclusive, especially on the, on the TO side. Like, I have no problem with 8 teams starting this. Like, you don't hear me bitching like this should be 20 teams right off the bat. Why the fuck? Those team lists make sense. One tournament organizer, which is really MTG, which holds a huge stake. Again, that's not, like I want them to be on that board. Damn right I do. But I would like to see anyone else who's a stakeholder in Counter-Strike Global Offensive to have a seat there. And again, to the point of it being called WESA and World and Esports and it's only Counter-Strike, what it might grow to be and what it's going to be for the next couple of years are actually two different things, I think, right?
Okay, so Scott's worried about even if the current people act in their own self-interest in a positive way, like they're not fucking each other and they are doing something which collectively for esports is good, in as much as their part's growing, the worry for Scott is that it's not inclusive enough, and it's a hegemony of the people who are there. Like, they're the top dogs, and so they're like, oh, we're going to make a nice little private club for ourselves, and then maybe you can join if we let you.
We will make more money. It will make more money.
Yeah.
But for less entities.
Okay.
I think
they are the 1%.
Yeah.
Just political rhetoric there. Okay, Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've already said that I'm pro some of the goals of the organization. I think one of the interesting things that we'll figure out over time is how effective it can be in affording those goals as an independent entity. Mike going through some of the history of traditional sports is good. I think part of the reality of this might be the first, and so maybe we see a counterbalancing thing, and maybe we see a cohesive one. I mean, we don't know. Could there be the second World Esports Association that's purely operated by FACEIT, or is it going to be FACEIT and MLG and try and do like a European?
Okay, here's the problem, Bryce. Let's just stop right there. That's a really good point. So let me ask you this then. Here's the problem. Since this is the World Esports Association, by itself already we're going to get into that nightmare reality where, like, I'm the global Esports Association. That in itself is a nightmare, right? Yeah, but beyond that, think about this, Bryce. How could there be? We just discussed possibly in 2 years, teams will have some level of exclusivity. How can EnVyUs be in the FACEIT Global Esports Association thing and be in this one, and then be in the third one that's the Turner? How can they be in all three?
So the answer is, if it's exclusivity, then you can't. But there was an NBA and there was an ABA, right? And by the way, that was the National Basketball Association and the American Basketball Association. So like,
same shit, right?
Yeah, same shit, right? Exact same name. They're like, oh, we gotta change. Oh, we're in America. Okay, let's just say we're American. And same thing as national doesn't matter, right? So like, I'm also worried about the branding issue. As for there are only 8 teams in this. There are plenty of other big multi-gaming organizations. Maybe they're not as dominant in Counter-Strike. Maybe the second one emerges focused on, I don't know, Dota or Overwatch. If Overwatch gets as big as Blizzard hopes it'll be, right? So there's a number of ways in which you can envision a competing body with the same basic principles emerging, with different teams involved. Maybe teams go from one to the other, right? That happened in the history of traditional sports as well. So there's a bunch of ways you could see this evolving. So it would not surprise me to see, either another tournament organizer or multiple band together and try to create kind of a counterbalancing power where they could, maybe combined offer the same thing or something better, right? It's all going to push to the same end, though, which is, or hopefully will push to the same end, which is, more organization and structure and the actual ability to fix some of the issues that we've been highlighting throughout. Like, I think everybody agrees lack of dispute resolution a problem. Everybody agrees lack of meaningful save from players problem. I think everybody agrees lack of player contract standardization problem, right? Like, so on and so forth. Not that every contract needs to be the same, but that we could create certain minimums and that would be beneficial for the industry as a whole, obviously for players, right? So for me, my question moving forward is, will that counterbalancing other entity emerge? Or if it doesn't emerge, how effective will WESA truly be in achieving some of these goals? Like, for me, I worry about the scenario of, okay, so you're going to have, and because this is weird, right? When we're talking about the NBA and the ABA, you were either all in or you weren't, right? So like, the ABA only ran with those teams, and the NBA only ran with those teams, and there wasn't crossover. There weren't some random third-party teams that came in. With WESA, ESL is still going to operate pro league, presumably, or some version of major ESL competition. It's not going to be just these 8 teams. Right, there are gonna be other teams involved.
Yeah, and so, already said that.
Right, so but that's gonna be freaking weird, because the interaction between, for example, disputes between someone who is submitted to grievance procedures that are set up by WESA and someone who hasn't, right? Or what about if you're going to play in an ESL league, are they going to start demanding certain rights and creating certain standards, which then you have to comply with across the board? Are you going to have a player contract that only exists for like the 2-month window of time for WESA, and then or for whatever major ESL league, and then different contracts that work for year round? If there's a dispute between the player and the team that's not one of the WESA founding members, can they submit to the WESA arbitration? And then, or more importantly than that, because I think probably the answer is yes. I think ESL is going to say, yeah, we have this binding dispute resolution process. If you're going to play in our league, you have to agree to it. Well, okay, but will FACEIT or MLG or whoever else operating these competitions enforce it? If this player really hates an organization but is under contract and the organization's holding it up, and they go into the WESA dispute resolution process, and WESA says, neutral arbitrators, or, say there's a great process, and the neutral arbitrator says, hey, you're stuck in this contract, you signed it, you can't, just because you got a better offer to play somewhere else, okay, so they do, but then can't they just leave, and is the ECS or Turner or, one of the other, MLG or whoever, the other organizers, are they going to enforce decisions? So I think this could get way more complex before it gets simple. And so my fear in all of this, in how this plays out, is I want WESA to succeed. I want to raise the bar on some of these issues, right? And so my fear is, will they be able to succeed on these issues in a fractured structure where some teams that are playing in their competitions have bought in and some teams haven't bought in? And by bought in, I mean not just in a financial sense, but in a legal sense, and have you committed your organization to the macro principles of this entity? So I think there's going to be it's going to get weird before it gets fixed. Like, there's going to be a world in which there's multiple sets of rules, and they're going to be way more different than they are right now. Right now, the worst thing you could say maybe is you could get banned from ESL for violating their anti-doping policy, and then I don't even know if and when that happens, how ECS and Turner are going to react. Right? They're certainly not bound by that decision. So, that's the worst thing you could say, but you could wind up with way different rule sets governing and dispute resolution mechanisms and all this stuff. And so it's going to create a much more fractured environment, which could prove problematic. I don't know. I'm curious to see how it all plays out, but that's my trepidation about this model.
Okay, Mike, first things first. One thing that hasn't been stressed enough, and ESL themselves did a poor job of explaining this, is that if you notice the people who spoke up against WESA, okay, it was like MLG, haven't run that many events, just run a major, cool, great, brilliant, but looked like they were out of the door until they were bought by Activision Blizzard. Then you've got Gfinity, let's be real, small company, isn't at the moment looking like it's going to get huge. Civo, very small company, just run an online league, which they don't even operate the LAN finals of. So not the big fishes, basically the people who, if I was going to run a massive association, I probably wouldn't go to these people first. Probably wouldn't have these people,
PGL and Starletter too.
Yeah, they're also,
but all the same
in
level.
their own regions, they're good, but they're not massive. Okay, they're not global. So basically, the people crying are the people who couldn't get invited to the table. Okay, then the people who didn't comment yet are huge players. So DreamHack, okay, part of MTG. We understand that. Ignore that for a moment. They don't have to worry about that. Why haven't FaceIt made any comment? The reason why FaceIt haven't made any comment is because FaceIt want the FaceIt association and have already tried to make the FaceIt association. This is not the first one. ESL, congrats, they were first. They were the first to do it. Now that's what's interesting. I think that's the reason why FaceIt haven't done it, because one day they want one. They don't want to make it, oh, associations are bad, fuck associations, they're all criminals. And then a year later, the FaceIt Global Association announced Cloud9 leading it, So Mike, in this scenario, my question to you goes like this. So with all the benefits that can come with the visa and having all the rev share and all the rest of it, is there not some sort of hurdle in that area there, though, which is that at the moment, EnVyUs is part of the WESA. They are part of this one, and in theory, at the moment at least, your eggs are all in this basket out there, right? Like, it's going to be difficult to go in this one and be in the hypothetical FaceIt one if there was that in 2 years or something, right?
Yeah.
Are you kind of trusting that these guys will be the ones that will know what to do the best? Their association will succeed the best, and ultimately, in an ideal world, you never have to do anything else. They figure it all out.
Well, I wouldn't say they figure it all out. Like I said, I think the teams are very much involved in this.
Okay.
And, when I went into this, I'm going into it with other team owners who I felt are capable, and have some level of involvement where we're going to collectively make decisions and say this is a good idea or this is a bad idea versus what maybe the agenda for ESL is, right? So yes, and there are going to be other associations, 100%. And it's funny because it's not my place to say, oh, these guys are doing this and these guys are doing this, but I promise you right now that there are teams all over the world working together to try and create.
Well, put it this way, it was kind of suspicious that Cloud9, isn't it? Massive players are like, oh, we will just do nothing and sit on the sideline. Probably unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are certainly multiple associations who have been, who have kind of started to formulate and try to get something off the ground, and I'm sure that some of those will come to fruition. But what I will tell you is that the first one came from Visa. Okay? And the first notion of it, in the sense that one that was organized, where somebody's actually doing the work and spearheading it, that I came into contact with, running a Counter-Strike team, was Visa. And then many others started to kind of, I guess, rumble. Or not many others, but a couple others started rumbling, right? And that's where it started. And yeah, I think that it's fine. You know, and I don't think we're going to fracture the whole scene in a way where you're never going to see Cloud9 play Envy, or you're never going to see a North American team play, they're not going to play against the European teams. We're still going to play against each other. We're still, I'm going to make sure of that, you know, I'm going to go to bat to make sure that happens. And I'm like positive it will. I don't think that there's ever going to be a situation where we're completely fragmented. Okay. So, there will be other associations, and maybe they all come and play under WESA, and everybody kind of figures out that it's better for them eventually when they can't get an association off the ground. But in the case, my idea is that I don't care if there's competition. What I care about is that we just improve the standards that we have. We improve the opportunities that we have as organizations, players, and we give a better experience to the fans too. I think that comes out of this. I think that when money comes in, it makes the experience, the viewing, the spectating experience better. We went from, Counter-Strike years ago was played on little 8-foot fold-out tables, right? Like without many people watching. Now we're in arenas on 150-foot stages with pyro and lighting, and I think that continues to grow as money gets regulated in the scene. And just to add to the last part of it, if there are multiple associations, I think that eventually it becomes a situation where they work together, and very much like what we've seen in mainstream sports with NFL, AFL, with ABA, NBA. You've seen this kind of happen in the past. So I'm not worried about it. I think that it's about getting our hands dirty, starting to work on it, try to evolve it, and try to just make sure that we have the best interests of the whole scene in our brains while we do it.
Okay, Scott, come in. What do you think on some of this stuff?
Again, I agree with a lot of points. Again, I've always said, like, I think we're more like action sports, even though we play team games a lot in esports, than we are traditional structured closed leagues. I've always just kind of felt that way. And especially the early days, you look at skateboarding, look at snowboarding, look at all those kind of sports and how they grew to what they are now. Still not quite as regulated as probably even they should be, but far more open than like a traditional league structured sport. Again, neither are evil, neither are bad, just different. Another example that we talk about a lot is like the tennis, ATP, right? For all sorts of reasons, we bring up those guys. And I often think to me, like we're very much like the PGA as well, right? Without the PGA. And maybe, like, no one mentions the PGA, but I wish maybe we were more like the PGA. Because the PGA doesn't own, that, like, the golf courses. They don't, like, they truly, even more than the NFL, they kind of sit over here, right? And they bless golf courses with running events, right? I mean,
the equivalent is they sanction them, right?
They sanction them, and
it's sanctioned and it sets the rules. That's what the PGA
does. They set the rules. They bring a crew in. They help facilitate, but it's your golf course. You're making most of the money. Yeah. There's obviously a financial involved. PGA does sell sponsorships for the PGA, but the reason I bring this one up the most is the greatest golf event on the planet is the Masters. It is the least PGA affected and touched golf event on the planet as well. Over the years, like you can read, it's very well known. The Masters has several times has said to PGA, "Fuck you. Yeah. This is how we're running our event. You will sanction us."
Yeah.
They don't care. Like, so they have separate rules. They can invite people back in perpetuity. And like Masters can only do that because they are the shit, right? And they were the shit before the PGA even really existed. But again, it's a different kind of way to run a top level sport, right? Tennis runs differently. Golf runs differently. Auto racing runs differently. So again, not that one is the perfect like model to jam our esports into, but I just don't know at the core if the NFL, NBA, NHL is for everybody, is it the way to go? Now, is it for a guy like Mike? Absolutely. He can own the fucking Chicago Bulls and be like, that's not an evil thing to want to aspire to be a top team in the top league. No questions asked. It's like having an LCS slot, right? For that game. Nothing wrong with ESL, again, wanting to be the top people in that as well. I want separation of church and state. You hear a lot in government, right? And I want this thing to act like a government regulatory, no money being made side of it to cover everybody. And if ESL and those guys want to go for a fucking league and try to like push it up and then lock it a little bit, go for it. Not a fan of it, but again, ain't gonna kill Counter-Strike.
Well, one thing I want to add to that too. Can I just add this when he's talking about this? So maybe and when I hear you talk about the Masters, and trust me, Scott, you and I see so eye to eye on a lot of some of these things, and I think that maybe the majors are our masters, right? Yeah. Where there's obviously we still have those. We have Counter-Strike.
The good thing is also, as
the majors are the majors. Yeah.
The key thing is Valve won't allow that to be taken over by something like VESA.
Right, of course they wouldn't, but still, so there's your masters. But they're still like, let's say, maybe it's not a major event, but let's say MLG wants to run a big stadium event somewhere, nationwide arena again, but it's not a major. But we loved it so much as a team, we'll still be able to participate in that right now as it is. And that's my point, is that it's kind of like the PGA still, even though there's this other association, in the sense that we can go and make circuit stops to make appearances and play in tournaments. Does that make sense?
So the big thing about this analogy, Scott, that I think is really important and different than the way Counter-Strike works is that Counter-Strike is purely open market right now, right? Like if I was a billionaire, I could organize an event tomorrow, right? Yep. I could call up a stadium, I could book that stadium, I could put out, this tournament's gonna give out $20 million in prize money, and guess what? Every single serious Counter-Strike team in the world would show up, try to get the money. Okay, so the big difference between tennis, golf, and what we have now.
Oh, by the way, let's just put this as well. There's also a negative to that, which is that if you did come along tomorrow and say, I'm going to put on a $100 million tournament, then guess what? If there wasn't VESA, Mike says tomorrow, sorry ESL, listen, love all the stuff you're doing, but I'm playing in the $100 million tournament. Like, I'm dropping ESL Pro League. If they have to.
Yeah, sure.
I'll give them credit in that sense. That is a way that you have to protect your own interests in a way.
Totally.
Someone like ESL gets fucked in that scenario.
They definitely do, which is why they want to create this league, right? They want to have some guarantee on content and exclusive content for a certain period of time because it's more valuable for them. So I think the economics of this make perfect sense for ESL. But for the point I was going to make is the PGA does sanction events. And they do make sure, one, the calendar's not oversaturated. Two, there's a decent break between major events, right? So it's not just, go and plan golf tournaments and you can get a PGA. So they build storylines. So the majors are obviously happening during the summer. They space them out accordingly so that it's not like one major stacked on top of the other, right? But then they also make sure that there's a known kind of tune-up event before a major. So it's not people who don't. I follow golf very seriously. I'm a serious golfer, and so people who don't follow it don't give a shit. They don't know the difference between the Waste Management Open and the whatever, the Buick, right?
And I'm naming.
Or the US Open, right? They don't care. Right, exactly. But the point is that there are known events that are kind of, here's the majors, here's the tier 2, right? Here's the tier 3, here's the tier 4. And so they do balance this out. And so what that means is you don't have Tiger going toe-to-toe with Rory every weekend, right? I mean, I should probably use Jordan Spieth or whatever, but I'm afraid that no one here knows who the fuck Jordan Spieth is. Okay. Best golfer in the world, by the way. So, they ensure that there's economic value associated with that storyline not coming up on a week-over-week basis. They ensure that the events you really want to play in are kind of spaced out, so the better players can take some time off. They're protected from injury that way, right? You don't want the best golfer in the world playing 52 weeks a year. That is bad. They are going to get hurt, and they're not going to be there for when you really need them, right? Okay. These are types of problems which you can draw direct correlations to CSGO, by the way, right? Tournament oversaturation is a problem. The schedule isn't confusing if you follow the scene really closely. But there is there are serious Counter-Strike teams playing each other every night of the week, which I love because on a night when I'm sitting, I work freaking late, so I've got two monitors, and I always League of Legends, not so much, but Counter-Strike, there's always Counter-Strike on that I can put in the background that's good Counter-Strike. Throw in the background if it's good, I tune in and watch, right? And so that's nice, but at the same time, there are real harms in that. The storylines do suck. We watched Na'Vi play Luminosity, right? And it's a phenomenal best of 3, and we're like, oh my god, it was unbelievable. I can't wait for the next time they play. But it's they play on Wednesday, and then they play the following Wednesday, and then they play the following Friday, and so it does kill it a little bit. I personally would enjoy it more, as much as I like watching good Counter-Strike, if you got that match and then you had to wait a month to see Na'Vi play Luminosity again, so that you could have all the hype and the build-up and who's going to win this time, and those teams would care a hell of a lot more about that match, too, because they don't get to play, they're not going to see each other all the time. So you do have all of these problems. It's making, the oversaturation of content is making everything less valuable. If you want Counter-Strike content, you can go and get it somewhere. It's increasing the rate of injuries. It's making it confusing. So there are real problems here, which a PGA-like body would be able to step in and solve. Like, it would be good if we had some overall thought about the Counter-Strike calendar. It'd be good if we could build these storylines. It'd be good if we could protect people from injury and disincentivize like teams from playing in events every single week. Whereas right now it's like, oh, let's just send them. And not to mention teams who go to an event and not care. Right? They'll go to the event and they'll be like, you know what, whatever, I can mail in this performance. If we won't boot camp for it. We don't care about the outcome that much. Maybe we'll do well, maybe we won't. But it doesn't matter if we're up to form.
I think part of the issue too is it's this yin and yang, right? Like I am not these days a huge fan of best of ones online. Like, I will watch less of those than I ever did before because there's so much, right? But if you're an ESL, if you're a Faceit, if you're even before that in ESEA, you know, like this online league component where there's Counter-Strike on every night and the teams don't have to fly anywhere and it's just a couple casters and some producers at a desk, that is like low-hanging, like production gravy for Counter-Strike right now, right? It is beautiful. And that's why all these people are fighting to own an exclusive league or whatever you want to call it. They want to own that stretch, right?
And they've sold those hours.
Yeah,
we're not just selling you the tournament. We're selling you the hours of all that shit that people are going to watch.
It stacks up 5 hours a day, 5 nights a week. That that eclipses your Friday, Saturday, Sunday in a stadium for and obviously your numbers go up in a stadium. Don't get me wrong, the hype and all that.
Viewer hours are going to be crazy though, right?
But your viewer hours and since our game is so fucking popular, these online numbers with good teams especially are fucking scary, stupid good. Like, it's great, but that means that players. So because I don't think we have an oversaturation problem. I think we have an oversaturation problem between having to go to events and travel, where it should really count, and coming home and having to actually play and not practice, right? Sure, yeah. But for leagues and those creating the content, i.e. the leagues and the tournament organizers, that at-home window for the players is the best for them because it's the cheapest for them to make that show and that content.
Pure gold.
Pure gold, right? And that's why they're all opening studios. That's why ESL has had studios for years for their variety of games. Have a couple casters, have the players at home. Doesn't matter what the game is. Could be Evolve, could be Titanfall, could be Rainbow Six. But we'll produce it like everyone's here. We'll get lots of good views, but we're not spending and building an arena. So if we could figure out a way to make that shit less important, I think that would help player rest, player practice for next event. And then, Bryce, I'm sorry you wouldn't be able to watch them play Tuesday night and then Thursday night, but you might see them that Saturday and then see them that next Sunday, right?
Yeah. And can I jump in just to add something here, Scott? Like, our team, just so you know, this is so funny, man. A lot of the bigger teams are on this path. Last year we had Faceit, ESL Pro League, we had Star Ladder, we had PGL, we had Game Show League, we had all these things where we were playing in online, okay?
And there might be a qualification or something else happening.
Let me tell you something. What is Envy playing in this year? In the online leagues that you've seen them in?
ECS and ESL Pro League?
Yeah.
That's it. We eliminated the rest of those already, and nobody said a thing. Got pissed at us and called us greedy or whatever, and you know, attacked us over it. We stopped playing in all of those and only focused on ESL Pro League and Faceit and ECS. And there are many teams doing that. And you know, the next step is to maybe say let's only go with one online league. And is that so bad in the sense that we need to let our players practice and train? Our team played in more tournaments last year than I think any other CS team outside of maybe Virtus Pro and TSM.
Yeah,
okay, and those are the two. I still think we might have played in more than they did, but it was insane. I mean, I felt bad for my players, and when we renegotiated their contract, I more than doubled their salary this year. Well, plus they won tournaments, but anyway. You're right. Like, we're doing this too much, and not from I don't care about the financial, economic perspective. Oh, I do, but not as much as I do the sense that the players need to practice. They need to be able to train sometime. They need to be able to have vacations, see their families, do things that normal people do. And the way it went last year, they didn't have any time. I mean, there were 2 stretches where my players were gone for 6 weeks straight on the road, and then came back home for a week and had to play 4 matches that week, online matches, and then go back out for 5 weeks straight. And that's not right, you know? And
sure, yeah.
I just think that if we're eliminating online leagues a little bit, it's not the worst situation. Maybe it's terrible for these other leagues who have interest in the scene, right? Yeah. Maybe it sucks for Faceit that we're going to do this with Visa, or it sucks for another organizer, but you know, we're still trying to work with them in other capacities. We're still open to do that. It's just that we've got to find a place where we can settle and get started. And I think that's that's my mentality behind it. And there's going to be a little collateral damage in some places. It's unavoidable, but we're trying to avoid it as much as possible where we can. And I care about the people who are going to get somewhat affected, right? But yeah, we're just going in that direction, and that's kind of the case for why I took our team into this scenario.
I mean, luckily in your case, they have had a lot more time off. You know, they only have to usually play day one of an event nowadays. You know, they took the ESL Pro League finals off. You know, they didn't want to go to London that week anyway. They planned in advance. You know,
yeah, they're getting a little bit of.
No, listen, it all took care of itself in the end. So
they're getting more of a rest this year than last year for sure.
I mean, there is kind of a difference though from looking at it in the purpose of like, hey, we need to trim because it's in the best interest of our players' mental health, or so to speak, and trimming for financial gain. Now, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive either, in the sense that there is a tit for tat on both of those things, right? If you do head towards an exclusive league, let's say, that limits, that takes away all the other shit you have to do online, that is a good thing for the team. You can't necessarily say it isn't good for the players or not. If they are focusing, if you can focus more on less, that is good too. And again, like I said with the whole analogy of this thing, I think this could be really good and make a shitload of money for people in Counter-Strike, but I think it's going to make more money for less people than if we stay open. Doesn't mean it's wrong or bad, right?
So here's the problem, Scott. Like you and Bryce touched on it, because you both went into your like extended soliloquy about your love for golf and the fucking PGA. The problem is, let's be real.
About the Lakers.
This is not WESA is not the PGA by any stretch of the imagination, because this is like if the US Open ran the PGA.
Yeah.
And guess what? Okay, initially they need everyone else. So initially they would be like, you know what? I know it's the US Open, but they've applied all these US Open board members to the PGA here, but we don't run the PGA. You know, it's still about making golf bigger. So we still want to have all the other tournaments, you know, British Open, we want all that good stuff. But what happens is in a couple of years, when they have all the golfers on a contract that says you have to compete in the US Open, now they have leverage. They can go, you know what, US Open takes place these weeks, and everyone else, you get the fuck away. You could never be on these weeks because we have all the players in that sense. So the problem in that sense is there will all, unless, as Mike says, they can rip apart some of the aspects and bring other people in, which is still yet to be seen, there will always be an inherent bias towards ESL and ESL stuff, and that potentially could grow.
Yeah.
Is that not the case?
Yeah.
Yes. That's what's so, like, you know, we've talked about this a lot. You know, I think I'm, you know, it seems like Scott is pretty against WESA, Mike's for, I'm somewhere in the middle. I mean, my thing on this though is they should have just called it like that, right? I mean, like they,
it'd be a lot easier to respect,
this
right?
isn't ESL, right? That's the wrong thing to say. This is ESL. Everyone who's talking about this is ESL. You have 2 SL board members. You're not working with other organizers. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, like some people, like Scoots, right, might be opposed to it on a macro level, and it's not that his opinion is objectively right. It's just he likes a more open system, right? Personally, as like, you know, as much as I like golf, like I'm a big leagues fan. I actually like the idea of exclusive leagues. I don't have a huge issue with the notion of like the fact that there could be a Counter-Strike league where if you're playing Counter-Strike, like the top level teams are only playing in this league for performance. I don't care, as long as there's a good Counter-Strike on. It doesn't matter to me that much who is organizing it. As long as I do like the diversity, I do like getting different organizers in the mix. I would never want to live in a world in which no other organizers touch it. And like, I think one of the things we miss out on in League of Legends esports is Riot is so hell bent on controlling everything that with the exception of the scraps they throw to, you know, whatever, to the IEM events, that's basically it. So like, I miss seeing other organizers flare and take on the game from a structure perspective, you know, event hosting in every way, right? So I don't want to lose that in Counter-Strike, but this is like a, you know, we could sit here and debate that issue, like league, you know, like NFL versus PGA structure for hours and not get anywhere, because it's really just a value judgment about like how you like to consume your sporting content. Do you like it to be kind of everything is standalone and you're not building something great, or do you where, you know, you can get to, or do you like building a whole regular season, jockeying for seeding and qualifying for playoffs? You know, there are advantages, there's strengths and weaknesses to both sides, but you know, there's no doubt about it that WESA, Visa, whatever the hell it's called, falls into the second category, not the first.
Here's the thing, okay, the best example of where ESL failed was, here's one piece of mainstream press they got that wasn't good, was that GameSpot interview that
UK,
they did.
That's
so there's a section, okay, I'll just read this little section out, because this is where they interview Pietro Fringuelli, who is the WESA interim commissioner, okay? This guy who was first associated with UEFA in football, so he has a pedigree from outside of esports. So they asked him, so Pietro, you're independent. Fringuelli says, yeah. They say, independent from the ESL? Independent from the teams? Fringuelli, yep. What safeguards your independence? Nothing. This is exactly the system we are implementing now. Now, I'd love to be inside that guy's brain when he came up with that answer there. So it's like, you've admitted twice that you're independent, okay, and that you're not ESL. And then they're like, well, how are we going to be sure you're not ESL? Because the first thing I'm going to do is make sure this system ensures I'm not ESL. Even if we, like, the problem with that is, again, it's still trying to peddle the notion that it's not ESL doing this. Like, that's an issue I want to bring up, okay? So I had this as one of the topics I wanted to do before, so we don't miss this topic off, okay? Which goes like this. Mike, I understand that people have to act in their own self-interest. I've constantly stressed that as an undertone in this discussion, because I think when people are honest that their self-interest is a key motivating factor, you can relate to them, because we all, to some degree, have to act in our own self-interest. Especially, you can't expect us to act against our self-interest when it's just us doing it. We could be part of a union that could act against our self-interest when we're being too greedy, but we ourselves are never going to literally take something that will ultra-fuck ourselves so that it helps Bryce if we're not in some sort of union. That would be stupid to do so. I mean, he's not going to do the same in reverse. So the part I don't understand about this scenario, okay, is the notion that it really is independent, which they've sold it as. 'Cause it's clearly not independent. And here's what I don't understand. If all these great things could be accomplished, and it doesn't have to be ESL involved, why couldn't it be independent? Like, why couldn't these people who were the managing director of ESL, and then the other guy was, I forget his role in the ESL, why couldn't they leave ESL and set this organization up? And here's what's great. That would even be a very soft way to make it ESL exclusive, because they would obviously still be friends with all of ESL, have just come from ESL, know that ESL are great guys trying to accomplish great things, probably be a little bit biased in their favor, but they would still be totally independent, and then you'd never have to ask that question again. Like, why couldn't this body exist? I'm asking Mike specifically first. Why couldn't it exist without, like, ESL doing it? Like, why did they have to be the progenitors of it? And I mean, listen, props to them for doing it, but why couldn't it exist on its own, do you think?
Yeah, well, let me say this first before I answer that question, is in the sense that I don't, in my review of all the communication that they've sent out since the press conference, and mind you, I was supposed to be in London. I wanted to go to the press conference and be there myself, but I couldn't attend because I was, too busy with the LCS team and buying that slot and all the legal work and everything that we're doing with building the roster. So I couldn't make it to London, but all of the messaging that I saw from them and all of the things that I've been reading online, I haven't seen anything where they're saying, like, I haven't seen them claim to be, this is completely independent of ESL. I haven't seen anything like that.
Didn't I just read out a thing? Yeah. Did you hear that thing I just read out?
Yes, Pietro, yes. Pietro himself, sure. Because he's right now interim commissioner, and he's counsel towards this and setting up regulations and articles and these things, right? Sure, Pietro himself, yeah, absolutely. But I haven't seen them say ESL has no hand in this.
No, but they just imply that there's a countervailing balance within it. That means ESL can't run the majority. That's what they've kind of stressed, right? Like,
sure, they can.
We've only got a minority board membership.
And they're right, yeah, and they're right, sure. But I haven't seen them come out and say, I mean, I think that the community is attacking them for that without actually, like, reading what ESL is saying about this.
Let's be fair, Mike. The reason the community is attacking them is because since they're saying it's not ESL and they're saying it's the World Esports Association, people are believing them. So they're believing the second part. Oh, it is what you're saying it is, and then they're looking, it's not that, and then that's the gulf is the problem.
I understand what you're saying. So and I understand what you're saying there. And sure, maybe they need to message that better, but I still don't think that they're trying to portray that they're not involved. Okay, so with that said, going back to kind of your. I guess
can't it be independent? Yeah.
So going back.
Why wasn't it? Why didn't it get created by someone else independently?
Right. Sure. So ESL is the one who brought this to light, right? Now I will tell you this, that I sat at a table with other organizers in the sense of trying to create an association with ESL with other organizers to create this kind of concept. Okay.
So this was the thing last year, without the details, okay, where basically all the people we've talked about, all the orgs, were going to have a certain... Okay, the big players.
Okay, but yeah, some of the bigger organizations...
And they were all going to try and balance against each other fairly.
That's where I'm going to leave it, okay?
Sure.
So yeah, so some bigger organizations, and ESL tried to include them, and we just... And now, I'm not saying that it was the other organization's fault, and I'm not saying ESL just decided eventually to exclude them, but what I'm saying is that they entertained it, and take that for what it is. And it was tried, at least tried, and eventually we just kind of started. ESL just said, "Okay, look, we got to do this. We're going to just start putting this into legal framework, and let's just start having these discussions on our own." And we did that, and we were simultaneously we were talking with other organizations. But the one that I decided made the most sense to me to get started with was this one, and that's the story, right? So people are speculating, saying, "Oh, okay, ESL just tried to dominate this from the get-go." That's not true. And sure, maybe MLG, CEVO, and some of those guys weren't part of the discussion. But like you said earlier, those are the small fries in the grand scheme of things, right? That haven't really been there to support Counter-Strike esports in such a big way. Actually, CEVO has, but they're just such a small company, right? CEVO's been around for years supporting the Counter-Strike ecosystem. Gfinity, relatively new. MLG probably had enough power to do it, but only did a couple events. So, yeah, I mean, that's my take on it, and I think that you guys need to know that.
I think so. You know, it goes back to me, which is a real messaging issue. Like Mike, they might not have a statement anywhere that says ESL, you know, that the WESA is wholly independent from ESL, but they did trumpet up and down the fact that it's an independent entity, right? Which is a semantical distinction. The point they're making is that they're legally different entities, and that these people, the VP and president of ESL that are also serving on the WESA board are serving on it. They're putting on a different hat. They're putting on a WESA hat, not a ESL hat when they're there.
But and I think they can do that. I honestly think that they can do that.
I believe that they can. It's a question of messaging, right? And so they really push the independence between the entities, which I think is the wrong thing to focus on. I think they should say, they're going to be wearing a different hat when they're there. Obviously, that hat they're going to be colored by their business relationship with ESL. Like, there's no way for us to eliminate that relationship, but that's not bad. And then I think they should be talking about, and this is in James's interview with Richard, right? He talks about the fact that they did approach other entities and that it wasn't able to work. That's not surprising for me. And this is part of the long article that's coming out. I think the WESA part, I think it comes out on Friday, the WESA part. But part of what I say in this is, it's not shocking that a bunch of direct business competitors are unable to come to an agreement where they all cede some form of authority to each other. That is a scary thing. Let's just say hypothetically, let's just take four, right? It's ESL, Faceit, Turner, and MLG. Those four are gonna all have a board seat on this, right? That means they could all theoretically be outvoted on their business direction, right? Depending on what level of authority you give to the actual governing entity, right? WESA. And so the notion of putting that together is extremely complicated, right? And not something that's easy to do. It's not something that's easy to do, especially for organizations, a lot of whom mistrust each other, where there's a lot of bad blood. So it's not surprising to me that we're going down this route, which is why I'm not as terrified about WESA as some other people are. I think that this is far more likely to go the route of, here's this one association. Someone's going to create the International Esports Association with other teams. Maybe it'll be more North American based, maybe it'll be more based in a different game. Obviously, Counter-Strike involvement, whatever. Eventually, they go up. Like, this is what will happen in the marketplace. Eventually, these will go up and up and up, and then maybe they'll merge, maybe they won't. Probably they will, because that's what's happened in the history of every traditional sport where there's ever been split leagues, right?
Exactly.
So that's fine. And you know what? It took us 18 months to get to WESA, and maybe it has the potential to do good things. So I'm fine with that. But again, this all comes down to ESL could have said what I just said. That could have been the messaging around this entity, and it wasn't. And because it wasn't, they're digging themselves out of one of the deepest PR holes internally in esports that I can remember, instead of just being transparent about who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, where this is going, and how they can serve their business interests and the interests of the industry simultaneously. Which, from my perspective, that's outside looking at, that's what I think is going to happen. I think
plus, they just ask for too much trust. Like, for example, what you just described there, the reason why no one would be scared about that association is because, yes, the reason why MLG can't fuck around there is because 3 different people who aren't MLG can say, well, we're going to fuck you up if you don't. We get 70. The problem with this is, even the way they presented it, like, listen, it's going to be really fair, and we're a minority thing. So, there's 4 seats on the board. We provide 2. So, 2, and there's a 5th one to decide the votes. Who hired him? Oh, we did.
Yeah.
Well, come on, man. I have to believe that the fix isn't in there. I have to believe that you're such good guys that you yourself put in... You yourself know that you need police, so the policeman was hired by you. Like, come on, man.
And the Watchmen, right?
Yeah, and the other version of this, right?
I'm not a very trusting person, put it that way. This is why I can't trust people, okay?
Yeah,
sure. And for me, right, and you know, I think that this entity, an entity whereby everyone actually willingly ceded power and everyone was at the table, would have way bigger impact, right, for the obvious reasons of they're all going to buy into the rulemaking, right? So, like, when we do something around player contracts dispute resolution, it applies across the board, okay? But there's a reason why those types of entities don't come into formation very often. Like, I was a freaking international relations major. I did a lot of work around the United Nations. Not a particularly powerful organization, according to anyone who knows anything about the United Nations. Because you have a whole bunch of sovereign states coming together and ceding some form of authority. So what do? They cede very little fucking authority, right? And so you might have this overarching thing which has everybody with a seat at the table, but no one wants to give it any power. So, you know, there's no, like, you know, magic solution where we go from where we are in esports right now to where we want to be in esports, which is to have something where we've all agreed on, you know, when we have fair system that creates fair processes, rulemaking, structure, the works, right? We're going to get there eventually. WESA could be a step in the right direction, or it might not. I think it will be, but, you know, time won't tell on this. I'm not ready to bet the farm on it. So, you know, for me, I that's why, you know, my whole theme on all my reaction to WESA is, like, I think the public outcry is a little overblown right now. We don't know enough information, and actions are going to speak way louder than words. We need to let them do this for a little bit, see how it works, see what counterbalancing things happen. Esports is terrified of change as a general rule, right? So I think we need to be a little less scared of that, because, hey, change is coming, guys. Like, you know, esports is a freight train that can't be stopped. I can't promise you that 10 years from now or 20 years from now, Counter-Strike and League of Legends will be the most popular games in the world. They probably won't be. But esports, whatever the most popular video game, competitive video game, will be among the most popular 5 sports on the planet. And there needs to be, part of that means we need to transition out of a world in which we kind of fly by the seat of our pants, and we need to figure out a lot of these issues that we've been talking about on this episode.
Okay. Right, pause that 1 second. Mike, have you just written something in that chat? I can't read it, remember, mate. So if you type my name and then say I need to go in 10 minutes or whatever.
No,
I can't know. Is that what someone was saying?
I'm not typing in the chat for you. I'm trying to sign League of Legends players.
Oh, okay, no problem. Scoots, what did you say?
It's a link in chat to Kevin Naki has released his story, actually, that you alluded to.
Okay, and what does it say, like?
It says, sources, FaZe clan to leave WESA.
Okay.
Team reportedly asked to exclusively sign with association. Sources close to FaZe tell IGN that the team will be leaving the newly formed World Esports Association due to early demands of exclusivity by ESL. They're reported to be paying as much as $50,000 out of pocket in penalties to leave the federation. It is also rumored that ESL will lose major status for the Cologne CSGO major, but it's unclear if these two situations are linked.
Okay, well, I won't. I'll cut all this part out. Okay, like there's no point doing that. It'll be like an extra 2 hours. So I'll cut in at this point in time. Okay, so one of the key last aspects I wanted to talk about, because we talked about a lot of the different variables here, and there's a lot of the grey area. I think people have gotten a lot of their points across. But one area I wanted to touch on finally is, okay, so hastr0, you don't like the fact that people were worried that this is exclusive. The word exclusive is so scary. People also, I'll admit, people do take the implications of exclusive way too far. Like, they thought that meant, as of today, you know, ESL was cutting off every other league. These teams, you basically were owned by ESL. You do everything ESL does. It's like they've just declared their dictatorship. Obviously, that's all ridiculous. But I always say this. Like, I hate this term because it's so ridiculous, but people have had to now create the term partial exclusivity, which is like, that doesn't exist. Is it exclusive or isn't it? So that whatever. We're now in this nightmare world where we're getting all these terms.
I used that one time, okay, and then the next day I was like, "You're a fucking moron."
I know that is a bad term, isn't it?
I was like, "Wait a second, did you just say?"
Okay,
it's like very unique. Something is very one of a kind.
So here's my problem with this issue. Okay, is that in order to not seem exclusive, at ESL were like, it's like the one PR meeting they did do is they were like, people don't like the word exclusive. Why don't we find a way to say that the exclusivity is inclusive? Actually, we want to bring people into the group. It's like, okay, so here's my question for you, Mike, Because what benefits you a lot about this group, if you think about the way Mike talked about LCS and about League of Legends, he's absolutely right. There are a lot of scumbag owners, and they might want to like poach Mike's players, and they might want to fuck players over, and he can't do anything to these people. All he can do is compete against them and be more successful. And that's it. He can't do anything to them. He has no power over them. So the problem is, for Mike, it's really good if he's part of an association where he gets to decide who gets to join that association. So if this was actually, I made the analogy in my video, if this was an inclusive group, then it would be like an open door that you could walk through. My analogy was, you can only have a locked or an open door. You can't have a partially locked door. That's a locked door. All doors are partially locked unless you have the key. So the key thing is, in a way, it is an exclusive association right now, because to join it, it's like a private gentleman's club. You have to submit to join, and then maybe the members get to vote on who can join.
I don't think it's like that, Duncan, because I think it's still inclusive and open in the sense that anyone can start an esports organization. Anyone can go out and start one and sign players and operate and run a business.
So they can run a different association.
No, what I'm saying is if anyone is going out and they sign a solid Counter-Strike roster that's competing at a professional level and they're running a sound business, there's no reason for us not to include them. Anyone can go do that. And in my opinion, it's an open system in that way. That, for example, if you know, right now, like let's say, look at Tempo Storm, for example, right? Of course, we're gonna entertain bringing we want Tempo Storm to potentially join the Visa Association, right? And you're gonna go out there and create those relationships and say, hey, would you be interested in it? Here's what we're doing. Here are regulations. Here are the articles. These are kind of terms. And you know, what I'm saying is that we're gonna go to the teams that I said in a tweet earlier too, that we think deserve it. And I don't want to sound like I'm the end all be all kind of judge of that, but let's just be honest. I think that everyone knows which teams and organizations with solid Counter-Strike rosters deserve to be involved in these discussions, right? And anyone who comes along that has that opportunity as well, you know. And as we evolve, there are checks and balances on you know, performance, right? If your team is just terrible and, you know, not performing well and are just, you know, you're not fielding a roster or not doing sound business within the space in the association, that's grounds for you to be removed, right? And somebody else to take your place. And I think that is important in this scenario, right? That I think it's still inclusive. I would say it's inclusive, and I would say it's open.
I think there are definitely degrees of exclusivity. If you think, like, go back to the golf analogies that you hate, right? I've played a number of private courses. I've caddied a number of private courses. Some of them you just basically write a check to get into. Good luck getting into Augusta, right? Like, you can't even go play Augusta. I've got a standing offer.
You have to put a limit on it, right, Bryce? You can't invite the world into the Masters.
There's a line drawing exercise that like everyone does in these types of scenarios. And you know, the great story about Augusta is Bill Gates once said to them, "Tell me how much money it'll cost me to join Augusta, and I will write that check. I don't care. Like, it literally doesn't matter to me. You want $100 million? Yes." And you know what Augusta said to him? "We like our exclusivity so much. It's more valuable to us to turn down your $100 million than it is to take the $100 million and have that extra money. We don't need your money. What we need is the prestige associated with to be with a club that you can't buy your way into," right? So that's like the extreme exclusivity, and then you've got someone on the other end of the spectrum. Technically, there are people who are going to vet. Every single private golf course on the planet has a membership committee that will do some level of vetting, right? But it's going to be, you know, some of them are very serious vetting, going to fucking check your bank financials and all this stuff, and get a whole bunch of references. Others of them are like, okay, do they have the check? Yeah. Do we talk to them? They seem like a normal human. Yeah. Okay, so they're in. So you know, it is true that like doors can only be locked or unlocked, but like that's like saying that there's no difference between one of the shitty motel locks that you can open with a credit card and a bank safe, right? So you know, I do think there's nuance here, and you know, the fact that there's some barrier to entry doesn't mean that it's like a purely exclusive thing.
Okay, Scott, when you were involved, here's one thing I like about you, Scott, is that you've actually always stayed true to what I was describing about ESL should have done and Riot should do, which is that when you were in these situations where you were acting in self-interest, you never pretended that evil geniuses signing a player in this particular manner and then having extra contract stuff was somehow helping complexity. You never pretended like, my self-interest is to help everyone. It's like you admit it is. And so as a result, when you're not involved anymore, you can also be transparent. Like, okay, I can see how that person would be doing it for this reason. What do you think about this issue? Because on one hand, they're both arguing that like this might be a very fair thing, and in the future, if anyone's like should be in, they'll all be allowed in. Is there any concern, like I have, a little bit of cynicism, that when Fnatic, Na'Vi, VP all get together, then they look at someone, let's say someone who's on the rise, like in the past, okay, Luminosity wasn't a big org, they were a little scrub org, and they happened to get lucky and get this really good Brazilian team. Now one day they come along, and for whatever reason, they won't, I can't think of the reason right now, I can't give you an example, but for whatever reason, these other orgs want to keep them out. In theory, they could, right?
Yeah. Again, I know you guys always give me shit and have for years about this like concept of the old boys club, right? This
sure, yeah.
This hidden power of certain people to still pull strings or whatever, whether it's back in the day or even nowadays. And in some regards, this is going to be a boys club, right? They will decide who gets to be members with them. I don't know
and they'll have access to all this money and the revenue sharing, and they'll have all the leagues set up, and that's assuming it all goes great, you know, if everything goes perfectly.
Yeah, and again, like, if Mike was an evil owner of a team and he really was self-centered about just making sure ESL made as much money, and then therefore he will as well because he's going to lock himself into them, then somewhere you have to put on that evil hat and go, wait a minute, why would I want more than 8 teams? Because aren't I splitting my pie a little bit? Now, the other side of that would be, well, those other teams that join could certainly bring the sellable value of their brands, which would grow the overall piece that ESL sells. So therefore, then Mike doesn't lose by adding more teams. Okay. It actually maybe grows his piece of the pie proportionately. And again, like, I think, obviously, we want more. There needs to be more than 8 teams in these tournaments anyway, and at these events, right? Like, if it's an 8-team exclusive league, like, they're just fucking themselves at this point, right? Because Counter-Strike's bigger than that. So I don't think that's the plan. But even at its core, Mike will always be a founding team. He will always be a founder club. Now, I don't know if that got him a secret decoder ring or an extra bathroom pass, but even if he brings in Complexity tomorrow, I guarantee it won't be at the same level. There will be a tier system to what they're doing, I bet. And maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Maybe whoever they bring in a year will come in right next to Mike. Equal no matter what. Same amount of money Mike got for signing on. Like how are you going to keep it fair? I don't know. But I've also, Duncan, to the credit of this question, I thought the exact same thing about if you silo this, right? If you go back to, forget WESA as it exists, and you go, rebuild it. All the top tournament organizers, all the top teams, all the top players are going to form
unions, basically.
Are going to form their own little associations, and together they shall one ring then to rule them all. Yeah. But where do you draw anyone's membership line? So even if it wasn't WESA, where does that team or that team silo or team association go? What's our cutoff? Do you have to have this much revenue? Do you have to win shit in Counter-Strike? Where is our minimum to even be considered? If you're a pro player association, what makes that guy a pro Counter-Strike player? Okay. Is it because he's signed by a team you deem pro? Like, so what is that association? What is it membership is based on? And same thing, you go over to the team, the tournament side. Well, obviously ESL, shitloads of tournaments of all sorts of sizes when it comes to Counter-Strike. But where does Gfinity fit in? Do they even hit the minimum threshold? MLG has only thrown a couple events, and they've done some stuff with SIVO. Where do they fit in? You know, so all those things. So this org has made one part of that simple. We are the only team organization as of right now. So we don't have to vet anybody else. It's us. It's obviously DreamHack. It's obviously ESEA products around that. All well and good. The team stuff is the question here. Again, ESL's job would be to want to make a machine that makes more money with more inclusiveness and not exclusiveness. Okay. Right? The minute it looks like it's in Mike's best interest, and I use you figuratively, Mike.
Sure. It's okay.
His best interest to keep that club small, they will vote and keep it small because they're businessmen, right? ESL's keeping their side of the club small because it makes sense in a lot of ways to do that. And again, where do you draw the line? Does Tempo Storm get in because they're really good Counter-Strike players right now? Or is Reynard a good enough of an owner, and he's ascended as an owner and as a businessman to deserve to be in there, right? Yeah. Obviously, because if you look at Complexity, those guys have business chops, right? but their roster is bullshit. So their roster should never get them in WESA, but maybe who they are would get them in WESA, right? WESA, I don't fucking know.
Sure, yeah.
So again, another tough decision. These guys have to decide. And maybe, again, paperwork we don't have. How does the association vote people in? How do they vote people out? Mike just said that you can get removed if you end up being a bad businessman.
Okay, right. Can you remember where you were roughly there?
Yeah, so again, I think it really depends on how it ends up being this rev share structure and the financial side of this organization in the sense of how it funnels money to the teams. And again, hopefully in a perfect world, knock on wood, the more teams that they have under it, the actual more money they all make, right? But I would be a little nervous that exclusivity leads to a really tight small boys club that makes a boatload of money on the game. Again, and maybe that's the way it goes. Maybe that's the way it's supposed to be.
Let's just not use the terminology tight small boys club. Like, I'm not comfortable with that one, Scott. Like, old boys club is one thing.
Not tight ones. God knows we're loose as fuck after all these years. So, and again, like I've never called anyone out for being evil. I've never given Mike shit for and any of the teams when like I've been very outspoken about it. No doubt about that. Like I am not a fan of the mix of two ideas that leads to an to what I'm also not a fan of, which would be an NFL style. Even though I know that they can play elsewhere, it's a little not quite like the NFL. Yeah, but and again, just my own personal opinion. I don't want this game to go that way. I see that in LCS, and again, maybe if I was a fan of League of Legends as a game, I would be the exact opposite. I would be like, oh my God, Counter-Strike absolutely has to have an LCS. Are you fucking stupid, Scoots? But I'm not really that guy. So, but again, no one's evil here. No one. I think there is this quasi mix of best interest for the community and best interest for our businesses at play here, and that is a good thing. Like Bryce said, like I think some good things can really come out of this. But I think ESL did us all a disservice by maybe not quite painting the house the color it really is. Right? It's a stupid analogy. Okay. But yeah.
Okay, so I think Mike's trains boarding anyway. So I bet I bet he's even got some smooth shit, right? I bet he does like business calls, and then they're like, "What's that sound in the background? Is that a train or something?" He's like, "You want to know what that sound is? That's the money train. You want to get on this train?" You know what? I bet he has some like. I bet he has some smooth shit. Come on.
So, well, yeah, I told him it's the loot train.
Okay,
the
there we go. I knew it. I knew there'd be some. He's got to have worked it into it somehow, hasn't he? He's got to own it.
It's gonna have to be at 8:55 p.m. because there's just there's something.
No, when I'm just talking to sponsors, I'm like, you hear that train in the background? That's the loot train.
I knew it.
You want to be on this loot train? Bring that money over. Bring that money over here to this loot train. No. What we call it the loot train because I play Diablo with my buddies.
Okay.
And then they hear the train like on TeamSpeak, and they're like, "All right, we're getting the loot. Here it comes!" And then all of a sudden they get a bunch of legendary drops in Diablo. Okay. But no, that's a story. That's why we call it the loot train. Sometimes I call it the pain train when I'm trying to sleep. But just get back on topic. I think some people are obviously going to have a lot to say about our decision to kind of do this, and a lot of it. I've seen a lot of really nasty tweets come my way, which I just don't think I necessarily deserve because I'm trying to be transparent about and open about why I feel like we need to be doing this, and I think that. Like I said, we need to evolve with it. We need to fix mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. So obviously, I think points or messaging, communication is clearly something that is not going well right now. And so there's one thing that can right off the bat get fixed. And many other things in this scenario can get fixed. But I don't think that it deserves the negative attention that it's getting. I think that we should have a proactive approach to it. And sure, if you have a problem with it, if you have a problem with some of these things, then speak up. But I think it's way beyond the level of where it should be in terms of negative feedback. And I would hope that we could be more constructive as an entire community of people who care about esports and Counter-Strike to then just slam it, because I think the concept is actually something that we need.
Okay. Bryce, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, good luck summarizing 4 hours of thoughts, right? But I mean, I guess the moral of my story on WESA is conceptually I don't have huge issues with it. I think other models that might be more successful would be even harder to get off the ground. I think the PR was not necessarily in line with what this actually is. Like like Scoots was just saying with his weird house painting analogy, right? Like if they had been more transparent about the direct business interests, and if they had tried to win the PR fight by being a little bit more honest and a little bit less less like this is all for the good of the players in the industry, right? I think it would have been a lot easier pill for people to swallow, because I think people can wrap their heads around the idea that this can be good for both, and that's not an evil thing. People constantly act in their own self-interest and also do good things, right? So, you know, the jury's still out. I think everyone should be skeptical of WESA. I think skepticism is important for developing this type of structure, just like it has been for the LCS. There have been plenty of examples, you know, of rule changes in the LCS as, you know, people get to interact with the rules and it evolves and people realize, hey, we can fix this, or the community doesn't like something for some reason, right? There are tons of examples of that. So, you know, we're going to evolve. Esports will continue to change. Skepticism, very healthy and good. But if you want that skepticism to add value, right, you can't just immediately dump on everything. It's not valuable to go into an AMA, no matter how like PR's intricate it is and how little they're saying, and just downvote every answer, even if it's not an objectionable answer. If it's an answer you really don't like, you can communicate that. You know what happens is like actually a really basic, good analogy for the situation of with WESA, with all this hate. If you go into that AMA and you downvote literally every answer, you're giving them no information whatsoever about what you disagree with and what you agree with. You're just like, we don't like you, downvote, right? But if you only downvote answers where they're describing something to you in the system, whether it's exclusivity or whatever that you disagree with, right? If you only downvote that thing, then they have gained valuable information. These people are not interested in doing something the community hates. They're not going to totally about-face their whole business plan here. But if you want to influence the direction of this moving forward, whether it's surrounding exclusivity or dispute resolution or player contract standardization or any of the things WES is going to do, you want to make your voice heard. It's not valuable to shoot a team owner an angry tweet. It's valuable to write up something constructive and say, you know, what your concerns are and how you think it can be improved.
Okay. So on that note, thanks to everyone for appearing. That's going to be the end of the episode.
Hey, I'm Hiko, the Master Baiter, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.